Oscar Pistorius, a famous Paralympic champion, is originally from South Africa and lives in the city of Pretoria. He was born on November 22, 1986, with a serious developmental disorder that caused his legs to be thin and underdeveloped. Oscar's family went through many hardships, and his parents often argued. He had a younger sister, and after her birth, his parents decided to divorce. However, his father continued to support the family financially. Oscar's mother taught him that one should not give up in difficult situations, but should fight instead. Growing up, Oscar was an active child. When he was just 1 year old, he had to have his legs amputated below the knee because they were not growing. At 17 months old, he was fitted with his first prosthetic legs. As Oscar grew older, he became stronger and decided to pursue a career in sports. He initially played rugby and water polo, but after injuring his kneecap as a teenager, he was advised to take up athletics for rehabilitation. Over time, his passion for athletics developed, particularly for short-distance running. At the age of 15, Oscar lost his mother, who had been his close friend and supporter in all his endeavors. This loss deeply affected him, leading to emotional distress, but he remained determined to continue his training and pursue his goals. His hard work paid off when, at 17, he won a bronze medal in the 100-meter race and a gold medal in the 200-meter race at the Athens Paralympic Games in 2004. In 2007, he showcased his talent again by finishing second in the 400-meter race. Despite his young age, Oscar has achieved incredible success that many can only dream of. He has attracted significant media attention and built a large fan base, earning him the nickname "the man who runs on blades," due to his special prosthetic legs and impressive speed. By 2012, Oscar had reached the peak of his athletic career. During this time, he met Reva Steenkamp, a 29-year-old South African model and law graduate, through a mutual friend named Justin. They felt an instant connection, often described as love at first sight, and began dating. They officially got engaged in 2013. Reva grew up in Cape Town with her father, Barry, her mother, June Steenkamp, and two half-brothers. The family later moved to Port Elizabeth, where she pursued a law degree at university. Reva was not only intelligent, graduating with honors, but she was also very attractive. She started modeling at the age of 14, initially as a hobby, but soon began to take it more seriously. By the age of 29, she had become a well-known face in fashion magazines, frequently appearing on television and participating in various shows. However, her life wasn't without challenges. At 20, she was involved in a serious accident while riding. Reva's father, Barry, was a renowned horse trainer and breaker. He introduced his daughter to riding at a young age, starting her off with a pony. When Reva was 20, she suffered a serious lower back injury after falling from a horse, which required her to nearly relearn how to walk. By 2012, she had fully recovered and had achieved both wealth and fame, similar to Oscar. Their first meeting was unplanned, but they encountered each other again at a major award event where Oscar was being honored. Photographers captured them together, and the media quickly labeled them a stunning couple, taking numerous photos and asking questions. Both Reva and Oscar were talented in their respective fields and appeared to be a perfect match. Eventually, they developed feelings for each other, began dating, and got engaged. On Valentine's Day, February 14, 2013, Oscar and Reva celebrated 3 months of their relationship with a dinner at Oscar's home. Oscar lived in a mansion located within a gated community, where all the houses were similar to his and were surrounded by tall fences for security. The residents were very wealthy and took extensive measures to protect themselves, such as using CCTV cameras, combination locks, and other security systems. The cameras at the entrance captured the arrival of Oscar and Reva. They enjoyed a romantic candlelight dinner and stayed up late into the night. Later, someone told the police that they had heard the sound of weapons exploding in Oscar's villa. Emergency services quickly arrived at the scene where a crowd had gathered to understand what had happened. Paramedics entered the house and found a girl lying on the bathroom floor, covered in blood. After examining her, they realized she was beyond help. She was dead. Oscar was found in the house, in a state of shock. The police tried to calm him, but he was so distressed that he couldn't comprehend what they were saying. He cried and screamed, eventually managing to explain that he had killed her because he thought she was a burglar. According to Oscar, after dinner, he and Reva went to bed. Early the next morning, he went out onto the balcony to get some fresh air, predicting that it would be a hot day. Suddenly, he heard a noise coming from the bathroom. Although he knew Reva was in bed with him, he didn't check on her. Believing that someone had broken into the house, he took a weapon from the nightstand where he always kept it. In his youth, he had been attacked by an unstable person and had received threats from envious individuals, which is why he took security seriously and kept weapons at home. That morning, however, he hadn't put on his prostheses and felt defenseless. When he heard a noise behind the bathroom door, he attacked it, trying to act quickly. Unfortunately, there was no burglar, only Reva, who had woken up and gone to the bathroom. Upon realizing her tragic mistake, she screamed for help, but it was too late. An investigation showed that Reva had been attacked 4 times. The first bullet struck her thigh, the second ricocheted and hit her back, the third shot hit her shoulder, and the final, fatal shot struck her head, killing her instantly. An investigation showed that Reva had been attacked 4 times. The first bullet struck her thigh, the second ricocheted and hit her back, the third shot hit her shoulder, and the final, fatal shot struck her head, killing her instantly. Early in the morning, Reva's family received a phone call that filled June, her mother, with dread. She hesitated to answer, knowing that calls at such an early hour often bring bad news. Inspector Botta delivered the heartbreaking information, causing her world to crumble. She struggled to stay upright as her legs gave way. Reva's father experienced several heart attacks after learning of her death. The next time they would see their daughter would be at the crematorium to say their goodbyes. Reva's mother, June, quickly informed the police of her concerns about Oscar, noting that her daughter and Oscar had ongoing issues. Although they were still in a relationship which had lasted only 3 months, it was clear that things were coming to an end. Reva's friend supported this perspective, revealing that Reva had expressed her desire to clarify their relationship on Valentine's Day and to break up amicably while remaining friends. Both the mother and friend shared similar views on the situation. In contrast, Oscar's friends expressed a different opinion, claiming that he was very happy in his relationship with Reva. The murder of Reva, a well-known model, by Oscar, a prominent Paralympic athlete, attracted significant media attention, leading to varying public opinions about the incident. Some people believed Oscar's explanation that the attack was accidental, while others suspected he may have had intentions to harm Reva. The authorities had not reached a consensus on Oscar's version of the incident. Many aspects of Oscar's story seemed to align with the details of his relationship with Reva. Friends of both Oscar and Reva stated that they were deeply in love, with Reva's friends confirming her happiness in this new relationship. She had previously experienced toxic relationships and felt fortunate to have found a good partner. Surveillance footage from a supermarket 2 days before the incident showed Oscar and Reva happily hugging and kissing while they shopped, appearing to be a couple in good spirits. This footage was presented as evidence during the investigation. However, a confusing detail emerged. Reva's friend claimed that she planned to visit Oscar's house on Valentine's Day to end their relationship, which raises questions. Why would she choose such a romantic day for a breakup? Additionally, during a police search of Oscar's home, they discovered a gift that Reva had prepared for him, a beautifully decorated frame with a collage of their happy moments together, accompanied by a heartfelt note expressing her love. This made it hard to believe that she intended to break up with him before giving such a romantic gift. The trial received significant media coverage, revealing an important detail. Oscar was deeply concerned about his safety and feared that someone might break into his house at night. This fear had troubled him since childhood, possibly inherited from his mother. After Oscar's parents separated, his mother and the children continued to live in a cottage where a thief had once broken in. Oscar, who has used prosthetic legs since birth, would take them off at home, leaving him vulnerable and unable to escape in an emergency. This fear was corroborated by Oscar's psychologist and his brother's friends. The weapon he had that morning was unlicensed and intended for self-defense. Reva's mother, June, informed the police that Reva's relationship with Oscar had recently taken a turn for the worse. A friend of Reva confirmed this, and several neighbors provided further insight. One woman testified that she heard Reva scream the night of the murder, describing it as a scream filled with fear, indicating that Reva was terrified for her life. Another neighbor, called as a witness by the defense, claimed he heard screams too, but he was convinced they were from a man, not a woman. Furthermore, during the trial, it was revealed that Reva was found on the bathroom floor, with the door locked and her mobile phone in hand. While it was normal for her to get up at night to use the bathroom, the locked door raises questions, particularly because she brought her phone with her. The prosecution investigated Oscar's history and discovered that years ago, he was involved in a serious boating accident on a river. He crashed into an obstacle and required immediate medical attention. Doctors performed surgery to repair his broken jaw and ribs, providing over 100 stitches. He was also diagnosed with a concussion and remained in a coma for several days. When police arrived at the scene, they found numerous empty beer bottles at the bottom of the boat. Eyewitnesses reported that Oscar was driving recklessly, screaming and laughing, while the boat sped down the river. After the accident, Oscar insisted he hadn't been drinking, but police tests revealed he was under the influence of alcohol. Additionally, it was revealed that Oscar had a long-standing problem with alcohol addiction. On March 3, 2014, the trial for the murder of Reva began. On September 12, Oscar Pistorius was found guilty of manslaughter because the judge determined that he did not intend to kill his girlfriend. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison. This sentence was considered lenient, and with good behavior, Oscar could have been released early. Over the years, Oscar gained many enemies and became concerned for his safety. The most notable adversary was prosecutor Jerry Nell, nicknamed Bull Terrier. After reviewing the case, he remarked, "Oscar is talking nonsense," and began searching for inconsistencies in Oscar's story. Jerry Nell, a dedicated professional, recognized that he was dealing with a man who had taken another person's life and sought true justice. After several court appeals, Jerry Nell succeeded in having Oscar's lenient sentence overturned. 2 years later, Oscar was back in court, facing charges of premeditated murder. Before the hearing began, the prosecutor wanted to speak with Oscar privately while he was under house arrest. He reminded Oscar that his home was protected by a 3-meter fence topped with electrified wire, along with an expensive security system and numerous motion sensors. Given this, where did the idea of a robber come from? The autopsy results showed that Reva had food in her stomach that she had eaten at 1 a.m., suggesting that she and Oscar had not gone to bed that night. The prosecutor suspected that Oscar was feeling jealousy toward Reva. As she prepared to leave, he became enraged. When Reva locked herself in the bathroom out of fear, he began attacking. This raised several questions. Why did Oscar start attacking? Why didn't he call the police if he believed a robber was in the bathroom? And why did he continue to attack after the first shot, especially when he heard Reva's screams? Overwhelmed by the prosecutor's portrayal of that night, Oscar struggled to respond. Jerry Nell assured Oscar that they would address many unanswered questions in court. The trial eventually took place, resulting in the judge sentencing Oscar Pistorius to 6 years in prison, a sentence that was similar to the original one. Oscar's lawyers later filed an appeal, which led to an increase in his sentence to 13 years and 6 months. As of 2023, Oscar can apply for parole, but he is still serving time in prison. Despite his repeated requests to be transferred to a different facility due to his fear of potential violence from other inmates, these requests were never granted. This marked the end of Oscar Pistorius' sporting career and public admiration. He was once a national hero, but his actions not only took the lives of others but also ruined his own promising future. In Michigan, there is a small town called Traverse City, with a population of about 15,000. It is famous for the picturesque Lake Michigan, on the shores of which several resorts can be found. In the summer, a large number of tourists are attracted by festivals and water sports events. They come to swim, ride boats, enjoy delicious local food, and appreciate the unique landscapes around Lakes Michigan. In the winter, the area is snowy and quiet, there are few tourists, and life flows very slowly. It was in such a place that 18-year-old Kaye Bruce lived and worked. She was always a cheerful and bright person. In addition, she was very smart, attractive, and determined. By the 1990s, she was considering pursuing an education. Thanks to her academic success in high school, she managed to gain admission to Northwestern Michigan College without any problems. The educational institution was located in Traverse City. To support herself away from her parents, Kaye worked as receptionist of a local beach condominium company that rented out apartments, rooms, and houses to visitors. The condominium was situated right on the lake and was very popular during the tourist season. On the evening of Monday, February 16, 1998, Kaye worked at beach condominiums from 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. In February, there were virtually no tourists, only a few locals, so she was almost alone in the building. The night before, while talking to her friend Kim, who also worked at the condominium, she had expressed her eagerness for the start of the season, hoping for more guests and an increase in her salary. That same day, with a little over an hour left before the end of her shift, Kaye had to do some light cleaning, put everything in the utility room, and then go home. That evening, Kim was not on shift but was passing by the beach condominiums at about 7:30 p.m. She had been driving her friends home after they had spent time together at a restaurant. As Kim drove past beach condominium, she looked toward the office through the window and noticed a light in the area of the administration desk, where Kaye was preparing to close up. Kim wanted to quickly drop off her friends and then stop by to see Kaye. However, when Kim returned about 40 minutes later, she saw that the light inside was off and Kaye was nowhere to be found. Thinking she was late and that her friend had already left. Satisfied that her friend had gone home, she turned around and left. The next morning, on Tuesday, February 17, 1998, at about 7 a.m., the first person to arrive at the beach condominium's office was an air conditioning technician named Zachary Medin. He immediately noticed that the door was unlocked. Although this did not cause him alarm, he calmly walked inside and called out Kaye's name. Receiving no answer, he saw that no one was at the reception desk where Kaye should have already been preparing for her workday. She was never late and usually arrived early. All the lights were off, and Zachary walked around the floor. He noticed a glimmer through the crack of a door and decided to investigate further. When he got closer, he saw suspicious red stains near the threshold. It was unclear what it was, but when he opened the door, he realized the horrendous nature of the scene. In horror, Zachary ran away and immediately called emergency services at 911. When the police arrived, Zachary could barely speak, looking emotionally traumatized and barely holding back tears as he described the situation. The scene found in the utility room was soon deemed one of the most horrifying crime scenes in local law enforcement history. In the small room, where household appliances and cleaning supplies were stored, there was blood everywhere, on the walls, even the ceiling. In the middle of the room was the mutilated body of a girl. The victim was Kaye Bruce, the 18-year-old employee. Next to her body lay all the broken pieces, with shards of plastic and metal covered in dried blood, as well as particles of scalp and hair. Kaye was found naked, with one of the power cords from an iron wound tightly around her neck, cutting into her skin and crushing her larynx. According to the medical examiner's report, the victim had 19 deep lacerations that cut down to the bone. Her skull was crushed from numerous blows, fractures of the vault and facial bones were found. Severe injuries to her neck and throat were consistent with strangulation, indicating she had been beaten for an extended period with blunt objects on her body, abdomen, chest, and pelvis, leading to numerous internal bleeding. The most horrific detail discovered was a metal pin inserted into her perineum with such force that it damaged the tissues up to the pelvic bone, penetrating several centimeters into it. According to forensic experts, Kaye remained alive for some time after sustaining this injury until she eventually bled out. Her death was undoubtedly a painful one. The entire small utility room was covered with her blood, and it was smeared over her body as if she had fought back. Despite the small size of the room, it took forensic experts 6 hours to collect dozens of pieces of evidence. They discovered numerous defensive injuries, indicating a brutal struggle, along with signs of disorder around the area. Apparently, Kaye's resistance only angered her attacker. Footprints and similar traces were found strewn on the floor, suggesting that the attacker had jumped on Kaye in an attempt to cover this terrible incident. Local reports described the scene, and the first thing that struck the arriving journalist was the amount of blood. He immediately realized they were dealing with one of the most terrible crimes in the town's history. Despite years of experience reporting from dozens of bloody crime scenes, he had never seen such cruelty before. He labeled the criminal a real monster and couldn't comprehend what could drive someone to commit such an atrocity against an innocent 18-year-old girl. Kaye Bruce died at about 8 p.m. the previous day. It is possible that when Kim was standing outside the office, her friend was already beyond help. She herself miraculously avoided a collision with the killer. Kaye's family was shocked by such a brutal murder and could not understand who could wish harm to such a sweet girl. Relatives, friends, and acquaintances told detectives that Kaye was a very nice and kind person. No one had ever heard anyone speak badly of her. It was hard to imagine that someone would have a motive to attack her. Some items were missing from the crime scene, but nothing significant, so the theory of a robbery gone wrong was not considered. Detectives suspected that the perpetrator must have known Kaye personally, given the brutal nature of the attack. Revenge, hatred, or jealousy seemed likely motives. The attacker was probably observing her and knew her daily routine, allowing him to choose the moment when Kaye would be most vulnerable. He likely knew when to strike so that no one would be nearby, and she might have trusted him. They decided to search for the criminal among Kaye's immediate acquaintances and among local residents who might have been in regular contact with her, possibly even living nearby. Unfortunately, there were no CCTV cameras on the premises of the resort or even inside the office, which left them without clues. All the blood at the crime scene was analyzed and confirmed to belong to the victim, but no fingerprints could be found. It was clear that the perpetrator had some criminal experience. He was probably wearing gloves or had carefully erased all traces of his presence. The forensic team collected more than 100 pieces of evidence from the small utility room. The only trace left by the aggressor were boot prints found on the body and the bloody floor. Forensic experts used a special substance that allowed them to obtain a clearer pattern of the shoe's sole along with all the small details. When the police received a full footprint, they assessed the killer's size. He had to be a tall, strong man who wore large shoes. The print had a clear tread, resembled work shoes. Detectives visited local stores to find a similar pair and discovered that the prints matched shoes from a brand called Pajar. When combined with the prints found on Kaye's body, they turned out to be identical, leading to a person who likely used specific clothing. The young man who worked in a condominium quickly attracted the authorities' attention, Zachary Medden, who discovered the body and reported it to the police. Detectives were alarmed that he had gone to the police to report finding the body. This was a tactic sometimes used by murderers hoping to remove suspicion from themselves and gather information about the progress of the investigation. Zachary was taken to the station for an official interrogation to verify and exclude him from the list of suspects. He was still visibly shaken by what he had seen, struggling to control himself, and appeared sincere. Zachary voluntarily allowed his car to be searched. The investigation had reached a dead end, with no valuable information emerging and all suspects cleared. The excitement in a local community was reaching its peak. It became almost impossible to buy a regular pepper spray for self-defense, as supplies were quickly depleted. The main customers were schoolgirls and female students, afraid to walk alone or go out at night. One of the detectives arrived at the college dormitory where Kaye studied, and witnesses reported several suspicious young people who had already checked in there. They needed to be checked. In the end, it turned out that they were not involved. The detective spoke to their friend Kim, who knew Kaye better than anyone else in the city. She said that shortly before the murder, Kaye had broken up with her boyfriend, whose name was Dylan. They broke up and started dating again. As far as Kim knew, they had broken up again, but Dylan desperately tried to renew contact with Kaye. He was obsessively persistent, even manipulative. They talked to him just 2 days after the murder. Dylan worked with heating, air conditioning equipment and serviced the units. They immediately noticed that he had boots of the brand Pilar, similar in size to the footprints found at the crime scene. Dylan had several pairs of the same brand, which were immediately sent to the laboratory for examination. However, no traces of blood could be found on them. Of course, he could have had other similar boots that he got rid of after the attack, but no matter how hard the police tried, they could not find any evidence against Dylan. Additionally, he had a reliable alibi, so he was excluded from the list of suspects. The killer could now be tens or even hundreds of kilometers away from the condominium, but the degree of cruelty suggested great hatred or sadistic inclinations. They were looking for all criminals prone to attacking women who had recently been released from prison and lived in the area. However, all efforts were in vain. During the inspection of the hill, a small metal rod was found. It was a part of a car tire valve. On it, they found Kaylee's blood and several hairs that did not belong to her. One of them had an entire follicle, which allowed them to create a DNA profile of the probable criminal. Hopes for this were still low as the technology at the time was not yet perfect. In any case, this version needed to be checked, and that took time. They decided to use all the meager materials available to them. They organized a press conference and appealed to the public. The key moment on which they focused was the problem of numerous false statements. People contacted the police station, and all leads were checked. One person who contacted them was a local resident who worked as a presenter at a radio station. His name was John Chandler. He immediately noted that his information could help find the criminal. On February 26, 1998, 10 days after the murder of Kaylee and following the press conference, John went to change the tires on his car. Near the resort area, there was an industrial park and a tire factory that he visited. While in the waiting room, he accidentally overheard the manager talking to the rest of the staff, trying to find one of the workers. The employees were discussing that a technician had not shown up for work and had not been seen for several days. They had all seen the press conference, so they suspected something was wrong. There were rumors that the missing man had a very bad character. One colleague mentioned that a day after the murder of Kaylee, he had seen this technician wearing boots of the brand Pajar, which had suspicious dark spots. A day later, he bought himself new shoes and did not wear that pair again. After hearing all of this, John immediately called the police station to request that they check this tip. He felt that this information was very important, and the detectives were convinced of its significance. They went to the tire factory. The manager immediately admitted that John's words were true. Colleagues that morning had discussed one of the employees of the organization, who turned out to be 25-year-old Kevin Holtzer, the son of the director of the company. Several employees confirmed that he always wore large-sized Pajar boots while on shift. A few days after the murder, he had a new pair. After examining the area where Kevin usually worked, detectives noticed that small metal rods from tire valves were lying around on the floor. They looked very similar to the evidence from the crime scene. Local workers confirmed that these rods often flew off when changing tires. Now the police were sure that John's statement was leading them in the right direction. Their suspicions only grew stronger when they found out that Kevin had been renting a room in beach condominiums where Kaylee worked for 6 months. He had the opportunity to observe her, calculate her daily routine, and choose the right time when she would be alone. In fact, Kevin spoke with investigators as early as 8 a.m. on February 17th, when Kaylee's body was found. He was the only one who did not ask what had happened, which seemed strange. Kevin claimed he had quickly gone to work at the plant. Due to the lengthy process of examining the crime scene and collecting evidence, the detectives did not have the necessary clues when they spoke to Kevin. It became apparent that the criminal could have been in their hands from the very first minutes of the investigation, but he managed to slip away. The new main suspect was now wearing Pajar boots of the same size. It was decided to reanalyze the collected data and follow up on everything the local residents had said. The detectives spoke to one resident of beach condominiums. She said that, day of the attack, she returned home from work in the evening at about 10 p.m. The door was open, although she perfectly remembered locking it. It turned out that the master key had disappeared from the reception desk. Suspicions against Kevin were confirmed by Kaylee's friend Kim, who said that he often ran into the office and lingered at the reception desk while Kaylee worked there. Kim believed that Kaye liked Kevin, so he tried to spend any free minute chatting, even on far-fetched topics. He constantly asked to be let into his apartment with spare keys, which only the condominium administrator had access to. He claimed that he had forgotten or lost his own key. It seemed he was just looking for a reason to get closer to Kaye. Kevin was tall, athletic, practiced martial arts. He looked like a likely killer, but they failed to find him. He simply ran away. In search of additional information, they went to the tire factory where he worked and checked the guy's biography. They managed to find out that Kevin had problems with the police 5 years before the murder. He had been accused of abuse. In the late hours, Christina was returning home from a bar when a stranger grabbed her and dragged her into an alley, then began to beat her. She sustained very serious injuries and was sure that she was saved by a miracle. Realizing that the criminal wouldn't stop, Christina pretended to be dead and offered no resistance. As soon as she stopped moving, the criminal simply lost interest and left. Apparently, the attacker enjoyed beating and killing women, which was very disturbing. The potential serial killer could be anywhere, and now no one was safe. Trying to understand the moment when Kevin escaped, they realized that he had disappeared from all radar as soon as the press conference was over, which announced the size, brand of the shoes and the tread pattern he had worn before. In order to scare off the probable killer, the police obtained an arrest warrant and went to his apartment, but nothing valuable for their investigation could be found. There were no bloody shoes or clothing, and they even checked the drains in the bathroom, but found no traces of blood. This puzzled the detectives. Around the same time, a friend named Mike contacted the police station. He was very worried and said that he might know where to look for Kaye's killer. Just before this, he and his friend, Kevin, had spent Friday night at a club. They were drinking and chatting after a new press conference had been held. Detectives got a warrant for Kevin's arrest. During the party, Mike's phone rang. On the other end was another friend who asked where Kevin was, that the main suspect in the murder who was sitting across from Mike. Kevin became noticeably nervous, but Mike managed to say that his girlfriend had called and asked him to come home. Kevin did not suspect anything and said it was time for him to go. Mike walked Kevin to the parking lot, where they said goodbye and went their separate ways. As soon as Kevin disappeared from sight, Mike immediately called the police station, providing a description of Kevin's car and clothing. Mike had said he was heading south but gave no exact directions. Kevin was driving a noticeably gold-colored car, which was quickly tracked down. Detectives arrived at the parking lot, but the car was abandoned, and Kevin was not there. It seemed he had managed to escape punishment again. The police spoke to the guard, who admitted that he had talked with Kevin for a long time before Kevin fled. He reportedly headed to Indiana and planned to use the train. The detectives were following Kevin closely, but he was slightly ahead. During this same period, testing of hair found on the metal part of Kaye's body was completed. The blood from this small piece belonged to Kaye Bruce, while the hair was male. Samples were taken from Kevin's apartment, allowing for a comparison of the criminal's DNA profile, which matched completely. They feared that he, like a cornered animal, could start killing again, but they managed to intercept and arrest him. Earlier, during his transfer to Chicago, he had refused to cooperate with the investigation and immediately demanded a lawyer. However, the evidence against him was irrefutable, and the prosecutor considered the trial a mere formality. Detectives discovered that Kevin had moved into the beach condominiums just 6 months before the murder. They suspected that he had not chosen his victim randomly. They believed he probably liked Kaye and became obsessed with her, eventually stalking her. When he found out that Kaye would be working and studying in the city, he decided to get as close to her as possible. Naturally, all this could not end well. On June 21, 1999, Kevin Holtzer's trial began. He was charged with the murder of Kaye Bruce. Despite his father's wealth and a smart defense attorney, it seemed even the attorney considered his client guilty and did not even attempt to acquit him. In October 1999, the jury decided that Kevin Holtzer was guilty of first-degree murder, and he received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. In the years since before Kevin was convicted of abuse, there may have been more attacks. Their suspicion was investigated, but it was not possible to confirm these assumptions. everyone in his circle was in danger. In which, the witness finds her apartment door open when she comes home from work. She is shocked by the lucky coincidence that she was missed by Kevin Holtzer. The police believed this was not an accident. He had stolen the master key and used someone else's apartment because he knew that no one would be there for quite a long time. After the massacre, he entered someone else's territory to take a shower and wash away the traces of the attack. Kevin actually had no feelings for Kaye except cruelty. Any girl could have been in her place. He intentionally found excuses to approach her, chat with her, and ask for her keys because he wanted to learn how to get them. He carefully calculated Kaye's schedule as soon as she first talked to him. The lives of Traverse City residents were divided into before and after the murder of Kaye Bruce. This massacre was so cruel and senseless that the crime is still imprinted in the memory of many townspeople. Katrina Wright's brow was originally from Germany. There, she met an American serviceman named Charles, and they fell in love and got married. After their wedding, Charles brought Katrina to the United States, where they settled in a small town called Ayer, Massachusetts, which had around 5,000 residents. Together, they had 2 children, a son and a daughter. After leaving the military, Charles worked at a local factory that made knives and surgical instruments, providing for the family while Katrina stayed at home as a housewife. Katrina and Charles enjoyed a long life together filled with happy moments. As their children grew up and started their own lives, Katrina remained active, social, and energetic. When her children visited on weekends, she joyfully danced and had fun with her daughter. It was often hard to find her at home. In contrast, Charles was quiet, reserved, and calm. In 1980, Katrina was on the verge of realizing her long-held dream. She wanted to return to Germany to see how her home country had changed and to visit relatives and friends with whom she had kept in touch through letters over the years. To make this trip possible, she saved money for a long time but was so anxious about the possibility of her savings being stolen that she carried a large amount of cash in an envelope with her everywhere she went. This included outings to local restaurants with friends and family. When they learned about her money-carrying habit, they were surprised and often questioned her reasoning. It seemed odd to them that Katrina wasn't afraid to walk around with so much cash, especially since it posed a risk to her safety. However, Katrina believed that leaving the money at home unattended was even riskier. She felt that if she kept cash, her travel savings would be safe. At 48 years old, she truly thought her concerns were unfounded, at least until May 21, 1980. On that day, as usual, Charles left for work around 7 a.m., while Katrina stayed home a bit longer before heading to her job. However, by 10 a.m., her colleagues began to worry because she had not arrived at work. This was unusual for her. They attempted to call her, but she didn't answer. They also couldn't reach Charles, as he was out of contact during his shift, and mobile phones had not yet been invented. To save time, her colleagues began contacting the couple's closest relatives whose phone numbers they had. They were able to reach the daughter-in-law who lived next door to Katrina. She agreed to check on Katrina. At 10:45, she went to the address. She knocked on the door and windows several times, but there was no response. Her calls went unanswered, and the windows were tightly covered. When she tried to get inside, she found the front door was unlocked. As soon as she opened the door, it was clear that a struggle had occurred in the house. In the kitchen, she found Katrina lying on the floor, bleeding and unresponsive. The room showed signs of a violent confrontation, with furniture, appliances, and books scattered all around. The sink was soaked with water and blood, creating a horrifying scene. The daughter-in-law immediately called 911 for help, hoping that Katrina could be saved. However, she was too scared to remain in the house and waited for emergency responders outside. Paramedics quickly arrived at the house but were unable to save Katrina, who had already died. Detectives were immediately on the scene to investigate the crime. It became clear that the likely killer knew Katrina, as evidenced by the violence of the attack and the fact that the windows and locks were undamaged. This suggested that Katrina either let the attacker in willingly or he had a key. The assault took place in the kitchen, where the attacker used water to wash something in the sink, likely his hands or face. The kitchen remained messy, with blood and water splattered around. A faint fingerprint was discovered on the screen, while a clearer print was found on a toaster lying on the floor. Additionally, several hairs were found clutched in Katrina's fist, likely pulled from the attacker during a struggle. Unfortunately, DNA analysis techniques were still in their infancy at that time, so investigators could only collect and store the evidence for future analysis. Forensic scientists focused on the fingerprints they found. An expert determined that Katrina had been attacked multiple times. The suspected murder weapon, a paring knife, was discovered in the trash under the sink. The murder occurred in the kitchen, and it was clear that the house had been ransacked. The victim, Katrina, had her jewelry stolen, along with an envelope containing money she had saved for a trip back to her homeland. Initially, law enforcement believed the motive behind the crime was the stolen money. However, Katrina was determined to keep her savings, which led her to fight back against the robber, resulting in her tragic death. The numerous stab wounds also suggested a possible personal motive. Investigators looked into Katrina's personal life but found no one who could commit such a violent act. She did not have any obvious enemies and was not vocal about having money in her home, with only her closest friends knowing about her savings. This limited circle led them to suspect her husband, Charles. They theorized that the murder might have taken place before he left for work around 7 a.m. Evidence linked the murder weapon, a knife, to Charles, as it was produced by the company where he worked. He acknowledged that this knife was often used in their kitchen. While many residents owned similar knives, the knife in question had been thoroughly cleaned, which raised suspicions. During the interrogation, Charles expressed deep sorrow over his wife's death. He had been married to her for decades and appeared genuinely grief-stricken. Still, the fact that the perpetrator used a kitchen knife instead of a premeditated weapon was unusual for such a crime. Despite his apparent distress, Charles was subjected to a polygraph test, which he passed. In addition to the numerous stab wounds, Katrina had suffered a blow to the head from a blunt object, likely a lamp found broken near her body in the kitchen. Ultimately, with the collection of fingerprints and blood samples from the scene and after questioning Charles, the police decided to send him home. From the beginning, he was hesitant to go home because it reminded him of the tragedy. In 1980, there were no specialized companies for crime scene cleanup, so he had to rely on his relatives for assistance. Consequently, Katrina's daughter and daughter-in-law ended up cleaning the kitchen and removing blood from various surfaces. They also expressed their concerns to the authorities, who believed that Katrina's attacker might have been someone she knew personally. To understand what happened, they explored various possibilities. During their conversations, they recalled a 25-year-old man named Kenneth Walters. Born on August 16, 1953, Kenneth was 26 at the time of the crime. He comes from a large, troubled family. He lives near Katrina, and some of his relatives are facing legal troubles. Kenneth himself had a history of minor criminal offenses. Before reaching adulthood, he had been arrested for participating in a knife fight. Since it was his first offense, he received a fine and was required to perform community service. A few weeks prior to Katrina's death, Kenneth had attacked law enforcement officers. Although a trial was scheduled for the day she was murdered, he was released on bail beforehand. Kenneth worked as a cook at a restaurant that Katrina frequently visited to spend time with her friends and family. While she did not interact with him directly, he might have learned about her possessing a large sum of money, possibly by overhearing her conversations during his shifts. Katrina's daughter and daughter-in-law informed the police of their suspicions regarding him. Law enforcement officers decided to investigate Kenneth as a potential suspect in the murder. They spoke with him, but he denied any involvement and did not show any typical signs of a murderer. However, his previous involvement in a knife fight raised suspicions against him. When the police interviewed Kenneth again, he provided a solid alibi, supported by documentation. He had a time card that clearly indicated the hours he worked at the restaurant, which confirmed his statement. His colleagues, who were on duty with him that night, also verified his alibi. Kenneth explained that he left home the night before at 10 p.m., worked the night shift, and did not leave the restaurant until around 9 a.m. the next morning. A friend drove him back home, where his girlfriend could also confirm his presence. He did not stay long at home. He quickly changed clothes, took a shower, and left. By 10 a.m., he was attending a court hearing related to an incident involving a police officer. Given his tight schedule, he simply did not have the opportunity to commit the crime before his court appearance. Kenneth dressed neatly and left for court, where he remained until 11 a.m. Afterward, he returned to the restaurant and stayed there until 12:30 p.m. When he got home, he encountered the police, who were canvassing the neighborhood. They spoke with him, examined his clothes and body for any blood or scratches, finding none, which did not raise any suspicion. A forensic expert determined that the murder occurred around 7 a.m., likely soon after her husband Charles left for work. Detectives believe the crime could have taken place between 7 and 10:45 a.m., when the body was discovered. Given the limited time Kenneth had before the trial, it seemed unlikely that he could have committed the crime and escaped unnoticed. After verifying Kenneth's alibi, he was removed from the list of suspects due to a lack of evidence of criminal activity. However, investigators did not completely rule him out of the investigation as the case progressed, though they did not find any new evidence. Fingerprints retrieved from the crime scene did not match any in existing databases, which were not very advanced at that time. The investigation stalled for 2 years with little to no progress. During this time, a man named Robert Osborne contacted the police, claiming he had important information regarding Catherine's murder. However, he expected to receive a reward for his testimony. Detectives indicated that a reward could only be offered to someone providing valuable information that led to an arrest. Robert suggested that law enforcement should interview Kenneth's ex-girlfriend, Brenda Marsh. At the time of the call, Robert was dating Brenda and was familiar with Kenneth's situation. He claimed that Kenneth had confessed to the murder during a private conversation. By the time the police received this tip, Brenda had already broken up with Kenneth, who was living elsewhere. Brenda confirmed that at the time of Katrina's murder, she and Kenneth were living together. She described Kenneth as rude and cruel. Brenda had a daughter with him, and they were struggling financially. Following the advice of Robert, her new boyfriend, she decided to turn Kenneth in, hoping to receive a reward that would help her situation. According to Brenda, on the evening of May 20th, 1980, Kenneth left their home around 10 p.m. to go to work at a restaurant. However, when they called the restaurant later, they found out that Kenneth had not arrived there at the expected time. Brenda was uncertain about what time Kenneth returned home or whether he had gone to the restaurant at all. The next morning, he came back with a deep, fresh scratch on his face that was still bleeding. When Brenda asked him about it, he replied that it was none of her business. He quickly changed his clothes, took a shower, and left for a court appointment. When Kenneth returned from court regarding an assault case, Brenda informed him that the police were already investigating at their home. Kenneth was very upset about this and told Brenda that if the police asked her about him, she should say he hadn't lived there for about a month. After the investigation stalled, they relocated and waited a bit to avoid drawing attention to their escape. Brenda attempted to inquire about the incident with Kenneth, but he brushed off her concerns, stating that it was none of her business. However, one night, while drunk, he revealed that he had interacted with a German woman to take her money. Kenneth's testimony was contradicted by his time card, which showed he arrived at work on time and left only at 9 a.m. Brenda's statements also conflicted with the fact that Kenneth spoke to the police when he returned home and had no visible scratches on his face. Brenda's suspicions seemed unfounded. She could simply be a scorned ex seeking revenge on Kenneth. To clarify the situation, she was offered a polygraph test, which she took and passed. The detectives then decided to conduct a further investigation into Kenneth's background. They found another ex-girlfriend who claimed that Kenneth had also confessed to murdering a German woman, whom he referred to casually. Despite this new testimony, there was still little evidence against him. The fingerprints found on the toaster and faucet in the kitchen where Katrina died did not match Kenneth. This investigation took place in 1982, before DNA testing was available. To eliminate any doubts, they compared Kenneth's blood type with the blood found at the scene, and they matched it. The detectives viewed this as solid evidence of Kenneth's guilt, despite the low accuracy of such comparisons. It appeared that the prosecutor was eager to close the case quickly and needed someone to blame. Given the personal nature of the crime and its brutality, the police decided to thoroughly search for a possible motive. Kenneth had a difficult childhood that significantly shaped his life. He harbored a long-standing dislike for Katrina, feeling resentful towards her and her children. They all grew up together, and Katrina's children often boasted about their pocket money, which upset Kenneth because his family struggled financially. One day, driven by frustration, Kenneth and his sister broke into Katrina's house, stealing sweets and money from her children's piggy bank. At that time, Kenneth was only 10 years old. Katrina was understandably furious and insisted on taking action against him for his unacceptable behavior. Then, Kenneth was taken from his family and placed in a juvenile correctional facility at age 10. There, he faced harsh conditions alongside older teens who had committed more serious offenses. Kenneth found this experience traumatic and rarely spoke about it, yet he held a deep resentment towards Katrina for her role in his imprisonment. Despite the hostility he faced from others, his sister, Betty, supported him. Although she was younger, Betty was very close to Kenneth and always believed he was innocent. Despite Betty's support, Kenneth was arrested 2 years after Katrina's tragic death and charged with her murder. The hearing was set for 1983. Kenneth remained calm about the upcoming trial, confident in his alibi, which was supported by a timesheet. However, from the very beginning, the odds were stacked against him. His former girlfriend, Brenda, testified against him, sharing even more information than before. She claimed to have been in close contact with a friend of Katrina's who had previously dated Kenneth. Catherine's friend stated that Kenneth had given her a ring a few months after Catherine's death. Upon seeing the ring, Brenda realized it resembled one she had seen on Katrina before the murder. Photos of the ring were presented as evidence during the trial. The prosecution utilized clever tactics and presented various pieces of circumstantial evidence. Kenneth's lawyer believed he had a good chance of avoiding a conviction and advised him not to testify in his own defense. However, when it was time to present evidence of Kenneth's innocence, the timesheet had mysteriously disappeared. Without it, and relying only on his family's claims that he was a good person, there was no substantial proof to support his innocence. Consequently, Kenneth Walters was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The defense argued that Kenneth was fortunate that the state did not have the death penalty, otherwise, he would have faced execution. Kenneth maintained his innocence and requested a retrial, but only his sister Betty supported him. Others believed she was too emotionally attached and forgave him for his past mistakes. His history of wrongdoings influenced the jury's decision against him. Initially, his lawyer believed in his innocence and worked diligently to exonerate him. However, all appeals were denied. As time passed, the lawyer's enthusiasm dwindled. Kenneth lost the opportunity to have his case reconsidered and was left to serve a life sentence in prison. His family believed his imprisonment was due to his lack of financial resources. He could not afford a skilled lawyer. After all his appeals were turned down, no attorney wanted to take on his case. Kenneth accepted his fate, but Betty remained determined. She frequently visited him in prison and continued to believe in his innocence, steadfastly pursuing justice on his behalf. Kenneth had a difficult personality and frequently caused problems in prison, which made it hard for anyone to make excuses for his behavior. He even tried to end his life out of despair. During one visit, Betty was unable to see him because he was in solitary confinement after getting into a fight with another inmate. Once he was released from solitary, they were able to meet, and Betty had a heartfelt conversation with him, expressing her determination to help him get out of prison. Their trust in lawyers had faded, especially since many refused to take on Kenneth's case. Betty felt she could only rely on herself. At that time, she hadn't completed high school and lacked the necessary education. She had also divorced her husband, who had discouraged her from helping Kenneth. As a single mother of 2, she worked as a waitress, struggling to support herself and her children, but she remained committed to helping Kenneth. Betty first focused on finishing high school and then enrolled in college. She managed to balance her night shifts as a waitress while raising her kids. Despite the challenges, her determination and strong feelings propelled her forward. Betty eventually became a lawyer, fully knowledgeable about Kenneth's case but puzzled about how his timesheet went missing. Additionally, she discovered that Brenda, who reported a large scratch on Kenneth's face the day Katrina was murdered, had lied, as Kenneth had been in court, then at a restaurant, and later speaking with detectives. Those reports did not mention any injuries on Kenneth. It was odd that no one else noticed the scratch. Detectives typically pay close attention to such details, especially since Kenneth was one of the suspects from the beginning. Betty continuously reviewed the evidence and found substantial confirmation of her suspicions. Furthermore, she learned that Brenda did not actually take a polygraph test. Instead, Brenda only passed a voice test, which can indicate lies but is less reliable than a polygraph. Kenneth successfully passed the lie detector test, which should have worked in his favor, but this detail was not mentioned during the trial. As Betty investigated the circumstances surrounding Kenneth's conviction, she increasingly realized that law enforcement had seemingly chosen him as a scapegoat. Brenda went to the police after realizing that Kenneth had received a life sentence and admitted that she had lied under pressure from Robert, who hoped to gain financially. She also desired revenge on her ex, Kenneth, and felt pressured by the police. Now, she regretted that her actions had led to an innocent man being imprisoned for life. Another ex-girlfriend also revealed that she testified against Kenneth due to pressure from a female police officer who had a personal bias against him and was intent on seeing him convicted. It wasn't until 1999 that Betty gained access to significant evidence, specifically DNA samples collected from the crime scene. She uncovered a box of documents and samples, including blood and hair, that had never been analyzed before. The examination revealed that the DNA from the crime scene did not match Kenneth's. However, both law enforcement and the public worked to prevent the case from being reopened, while Katrina's family strongly resisted any new investigation. In 2000, Betty successfully reached out to the Innocence Project, a group of lawyers dedicated to assisting wrongfully convicted individuals. This organization had a team of experts and the resources needed to conduct thorough investigations. Betty presented evidence proving Kenneth's innocence, convincing the project to take on his case. She also contacted a female police officer involved in the investigation, who had a questionable reputation and had previously compromised her credibility in another case. Many in law enforcement spoke poorly of her, raising suspicions that she had intentionally framed Kenneth and had not lost key evidence by chance. Furthermore, inconsistencies in the testimonies of Kenneth's former girlfriends were exposed, particularly regarding a ring that was shown to the jury. It was discovered that the ring had been sent to Germany and did not match the jewelry owned by Kenneth's ex-girlfriend. It was smaller and unsuitable for Katrina. Betty sought to find the ring to counter another piece of evidence against Kenneth. She learned that the ring had initials engraved on it that did not belong to Katrina. Ultimately, due to Betty's extensive efforts in uncovering these discrepancies, the case was reopened, and the prosecutor dropped the charges against Kenneth. After spending 18 years, 5 months, and 10 days in prison, Kenneth was finally acquitted and became a free man. He was able to enjoy life again after being deprived of it for so long. Unfortunately, tragedy struck. On September 19, 2001, while visiting his brother's house, Kenneth decided to take a shortcut that required him to climb over a tall wall. He did not realize the wall on the other side was even higher. When he jumped from a height of 15 feet, he fell awkwardly, struck his head, and later died in the hospital. Betty, Kenneth's sister, remembered that those 6 months after his release were the happiest of his life. After so many years in prison, everything felt new to him. Even after his death, Betty continued to fight for justice. In 2004, she filed a lawsuit against the city for the wrongful imprisonment of Kenneth and the impact it had on their lives. By 2009, she successfully won the case, receiving $10.5 million in compensation. In this story, Katrina's murder case remains unsolved and often forgotten. The blood found at the crime scene was tested, but no matches were found in the police database. The identity of the person who brutally took her life remains unknown. Her family hopes that one day, the case will be solved. Calgary, Canada, nicknamed Cowtown, is a sprawling cosmopolitan community that grew rich from its role in the Canadian oil industry. Although Calgary is both cutting-edge and modern, it is also Canada's #1 rodeo destination, and its deep-rooted agricultural history is where the name Cowtown originates. It is here, in the quiet southeastern suburb of Ogden, that we meet Lisa Mitchell. Lisa was born in 1981, and she was one of 2 sisters. While the girls were growing up, their mother, Peggy, took care of them both. She loved her daughters very much, but also taught them to be independent. When Lisa was 4 years old, Peggy could already tell that her daughter would be unique. The girl was sociable, expressed her creativity through art and music. In high school, Lisa made many friends with whom she eventually formed a girl group. She graduated from high school with average grades but excelled in creative subjects such as art and music. After finishing school, Lisa held various positions at grocery stores and cafes, but above all, she wanted to work at various events, including concerts. This would give Lisa the opportunity to meet some of her favorite musicians. Soon, Lisa got a job at a private restaurant located in northeast Calgary. She liked the work and enjoyed the food there, but one of the sushi chefs particularly appreciated her presence. This man's name was Alan Schieback. Although Alan was actually shy and reserved, he managed to start a conversation with Lisa. From that moment, they began to grow closer. Initially, their relationship was happy, but there were also problems. Lisa's parents did not like Alan because they thought he spoiled her mood. Lisa was always a sociable, cheerful young girl who loved to take risks and express her emotions. In contrast, Alan was much more reserved, calculating, and suspicious of anything. Eventually, these differences created cracks in their relationship, and the situation became tense. After 5 years of living together, they eventually separated. Lisa started dating other men again, and although it seemed she had forgotten Alan, he could not say the same. Alan found it difficult to move on after their breakup, and so a few months later, he reappeared in Lisa's life, begging for a second chance. Lisa tried to forget him while dating again, but none of the men she met fulfilled her desires. So, when Alan presented her with an engagement ring right before her eyes, their relationship resumed quickly. However, despite the engagement, the quarrels also resumed. They decided to start a family. First, they had a son, and after 2 years, a daughter arrived. They tried their best to make their children happy, but they themselves had a hard time. Alan worked during the day while Lisa stayed home with the children, and in the evenings, after dinner, the spouses would switch places. This way of life began to strain them both. Fatigue accumulated, and the changing work schedules took away the time that they could spend together. Often, the time they did find led to arguments, which became increasingly heated and fierce, eventually escalating into physical confrontations. Alan and Lisa went so far as to pinch, slap each other. After 10 years of marriage and 2 children, they both felt they had no other choice but to try to improve their relationship. It seemed better to break up and seek new happiness. Lisa's wise mother thought the same. She often urged her daughter to end things with Alan and return home, where she would always be there to offer her support. In recent years, Lisa and Peggy had become very close, not only in relationship but also due to distance. In 2011, when Lisa got a second job at the Longview Hotel, only an hour's drive from her mother's house, the reason was that Alan had lost his job again, and Lisa often had to work overtime to make ends meet. This, of course, caused tension between the spouses. While Alan often stayed home with the kids, Lisa frequently stayed with her mother to have time and perhaps take a break from Alan. In October, at the hotel, there was an event in honor of Halloween, and Lisa was among the invitees. She agreed to go, taking her mother with her. Since Lisa had worked the next day, she decided to spend the night at her mother's house. They had a great time at the party, and everything went smoothly. The next morning, on October 29th, 2012, Peggy hugged her daughter before taking her to work, but from that moment on, everything would change. Despite sending numerous messages, Peggy did not receive a response from Lisa for several days, which was unusual since Lisa always replied promptly. After checking on some information, Peggy found out that Lisa had stopped showing up at work. After that day, Calls to Lisa and her family went unanswered. No one read her messages. Peggy began to worry seriously and decided to visit the Shyback residence. As she approached the front door, she knocked, not knowing who would answer. Later, Peggy said that Alan opened the door, and the first question she asked was, "Where is Lisa?" Alan replied that Lisa had left him. He claimed she ran away on Monday after an argument. He said that after they seemed to calm down, Lisa had sent him to buy cigarettes, and when he returned after 15 to 20 minutes, she was no longer at home. The conversation took place in the hallway. Looking to the right, Peggy noticed that Lisa's shoes and favorite jacket were still in the house. Since it was October, Peggy wondered where Lisa could have gone without dressing properly. She then told Alan that she wanted to see the rest of the house. As she walked through, she noted several of her daughter's personal belongings. However, she did not find Lisa's handbag, but she noticed that the jewelry Lisa always wore was still in its place. Lisa was nowhere to be found. Alan then claimed that after Lisa left, she had sent him an email. He asked Peggy to check her inbox, and indeed Lisa had written a letter to her mother. In this letter, she expressed how unhappy she was and that she needed to leave to clear her head. She wrote that they would soon contact each other more than once. There was something very strange about these letters. They were very different from her usual letters and lacked warmth and filled feelings. This time was tormenting for Peggy. She slept every night next to the phone in case her daughter called. Then, at 4:45 a.m. on November 16th, a very strange voice message was received. Peggy could not remember it word for word, but she realized that Lisa was fine. At the end of the voice message, Lisa said, "He is at home, I have to go." Peggy was confused. Who is at home? Where to go? She wondered if there was someone next to Lisa controlling her or if she was chained in a basement. This mysterious message prompted Peggy to decide to contact the police and initiate an investigation into the disappearance of Lisa Mitchell. The police first questioned those who had last seen Lisa and also visited the house where she lived. However, they did not find anything unusual there. The house was clean and tidy, except for the basement, which, like all basements, was full of junk. Checking the bank history and phone activity was unsuccessful. Lisa had not called or sent messages, and her funds on the cards had not been used since her disappearance. The case was treated as a missing persons case, and progress was slow. However, after more than 1 year, 3 months after Lisa's disappearance, Alan was finally interviewed by authorities to learn more about his relationship with his wife. He revealed that his relationship with Lisa had been rocky for the past decade. Alan also stated that his wife had dated other men while they were still living together and that he had found her profile on several dating sites. The information Alan provided was helpful to the police, but he still remained a suspect. Alan said that he had not heard from Lisa for several months. There is an expression that when a person disappears, their silence can be the loudest thing imaginable. As the investigation into Lisa's disappearance was delayed, the authorities decided to take extreme measures. Very rarely do people voluntarily remain missing for so long, and the police understood this. In connection with the change in local privacy laws, the police received the right to search for missing persons and study accounts, phone records. They were able to analyze the voice message that Lisa left for her mother a year ago. The phone from which the voice message was sent was traced back to Alan's number. Interestingly, Alan told the police that he had not heard from Lisa since she disappeared in October 2012, changing the authorities' view of him. Now that the case had become a criminal investigation, investigators were allowed access to all of his information, including his bank records. What they found was disturbing. It was revealed that back in 2012, Alan had made a rather strange purchase. He had gone to a local hardware store to buy gloves, bleach, a large plastic tub, a body mat, road salt, a wooden board, and concrete, items that the police would call a burial kit. The officers were troubled by this, but despite this evidence, the authorities felt it was not enough to arrest Alan. They needed something more, perhaps a confession. Based on this idea, a project called Aurora was created. It was a special operation aimed at achieving an eventual confession, and there was no easier way than through friendship. On December 4, 2013, a Thursday with temperatures well below zero, visibility in the area was quite good. That is why it was a real shock for Alan when a young woman crashed into his car in the parking lot of his workplace. She approached him to apologize, stating that it was an accident and that she would be happy to share her contact details to sort out the insurance. At first, Alan seemed unhappy, but eventually, he accepted the offer. Unknown to Alan, the woman was actually an undercover police officer. She told Alan that her boss would pay for any damage. That boss was also an undercover officer. The operation officially began. Several undercover officers were involved in maintaining the artificial friendship between Alan and his new friend. For instance, some female officers pretended to be nannies. They managed to become friends with Alan, who became so close to some of these imaginary friends that he even invited them out for drinks and to events. As for the first female officer, he politely invited her on a date, to which she, of course, gently declined. All these police officers slowly but surely approached Alan and his secrets in the hope that over time, they would obtain some kind of confession from him. To their credit, they had all been working for about a year, and their efforts were finally rewarded in December 2014 when a breakthrough was made. Feeling confident that a strong enough connection had been established between them and Alan, a plan was enacted to elicit the long-awaited confession. One of the officers arranged a trip by train to Winnipeg, which is more than 130 miles from Alan's home. As they were driving in Alan's car, a phone rang. It was the officer calling from the station to inform Alan that the status of Lisa's case had changed. Authorities now believed they were dealing with a murder, and officers were coming to his residence to search the house. On December 5, 2014, almost all the details of Lisa's disappearance finally became known. Alan, who was riding in the car with an undercover officer, said that he was in trouble, without going into details. The officer offered to help Alan and his children disappear, putting Alan in touch with a man who promised to assist him. This man was also an undercover officer. While the meeting was taking place, the police were already conducting a search at Alan's place. Unfortunately, they soon made a tragic and horrifying discovery in the basement of the family home. In the farthest corner of the house, cluttered with all sorts of junk, police found the remains of Lisa, crudely cemented and buried with a plastic bag. Her body was covered in cat litter and salt, indicating that the body had not decomposed naturally. Lisa's remains were partially mummified. Unfortunately, Alan had killed his wife, the mother of his children, and then hidden her under the house, where he continued to live upstairs for 26 months with his 2 children. During his meeting with the undercover officer, who promised to help Alan disappear, he felt compelled to explain why he needed to hide. He said that he and Lisa had a difficult relationship. They argued and then tried to make peace. He could not even remember what the argument was about that evening. When they went to sleep separately, he saw that Lisa had come to his bed, and he did not know what she wanted. He raised his hand and began to strangle her. He remembered holding the body while Lisa was convulsing. He then thought he needed to send a few text messages and emails to make people believe she had voluntarily disappeared. Afterward, he cleaned the scene of Lisa's death with bleach 2 or 3 times to ensure that no trace was left. There are several details in this case that indicate Alan was not the smartest of criminals, but one of his plans to cover up the crime was quite complex. He faked a voicemail that was supposedly left for Peggy by Lisa, stitching together several of Lisa's calls using a special program installed on her phone. Police found Alan searching online for body decomposition, salt, lime, concrete, lack of air, insects, between December 2012 and 2014, along with searches for Lisa Mitchell and murder laws. All this evidence, combined with Alan's candid conversation with the undercover officer, was enough for the officers to finally arrest him. He was charged with second-degree murder of Lisa Mitchell. It took more than 3 years to bring a case against Alan. The authorities should have taken his mental health into account, as it became known that he suffered from bipolar disorder. There was also a possibility that Alan acted in self-defense, as he claimed. In September 2017, Alan was finally brought to trial for Lisa's murder. The judge did not believe he had acted in self-defense, as the force he used against Lisa far outweighed any defensive actions. On the other hand, the judge did not believe that Alan had intended to kill his wife. In the end, he was not found guilty of second-degree murder. Instead, he was found guilty of the lesser crime of manslaughter, along with the abuse of a body. Alan Scheibach was sentenced to a short term of 7 years behind bars, though this term was later increased to 10 years. During his sentence, Alan was granted parole and was free for only 1 day. He grossly violated the rules of his freedom, and an excessive amount of medication for bipolar disorder was found in his home. However, Alan did not have to serve the full 10-year sentence and was released early. He is now a free man but is not allowed to contact Peggy or his children. Although Alan did not serve much of a prison sentence for Lisa's murder, he was given a strange punishment after discovering that most of his friends were undercover cops. This truth was deeply heartbreaking for him, and he would likely struggle with his issues for much of his life. Lisa's children live with their grandmother. Peggy says that in her grandchildren, she sees a lot of her daughter and is happy to watch them grow up. She describes her grandchildren as bright, outgoing, and cheerful, just like their mother was. It's hard to say what happened the night Lisa was killed. Was it self-defense or cold-blooded murder? The only thing we can be sure of is that Lisa was taken from this world too early. Described as a bright soul and caring daughter, she was also a loving, hard-working mother who held 2 jobs so that her children would have warmth and food. Unfortunately, her death means that her children are now left without a mother or father. The case of Lisa Mitchell is not only a heartbreaking story of loss, but also a reminder of the complexities of family relationships and the consequences of unresolved conflicts. Lisa's life, though cut short, was marked by her love for her children, her creativity, and her relentless optimism. Although Alan paid the price for his actions, that punishment cannot erase the pain that Lisa's family, especially her mother, Peggy, and her 2 children, have endured. Peggy now serves as a rock for her grandchildren, nurturing them with love and hope, just as Lisa did. The story ends on a sad note, but it also affirms that, although Lisa is no longer with us, her light continues to shine through the people she loved and the memories she left behind. Melissa Kalyasinski was the youngest of 5 siblings in the Kalyasinski family. They were always friendly and were considered an exemplary family living near Chicago, Illinois, USA. Melissa was very friendly and compassionate. However, according to her sister Crystal, Melissa faced social difficulties during her childhood. She had trouble making friends at school and was often teased. Melissa suffered from this, but she remained friendly throughout her life. When Melissa grew up and graduated from school, she decided to dedicate her life to working with children. At 22 years old, immediately after receiving her certificate, she began looking for a job in her favorite field. She was interested in kindergartens, working as a nanny, and caring for the younger generation. Naturally, she always wanted to have children, so she waited for the right partner with whom she could start a family. Finally, luck smiled upon her professionally. Melissa became an assistant teacher at Mini Subi Kindergarten located in Lincolnshire, a small, cozy suburb of Chicago. Melissa's eldest sister, Crystal, worked there and helped arrange for her position. Under Melissa's supervision were several small children, particularly Benjamin Kingan. It seemed everything was going well. She was happy to find fulfillment in her work with children, at least until January 14, 2009. That day, Melissa worked her usual shift as an assistant teacher. Benjamin appeared calm and played with the other children. At around 3:15 p.m., after the children were fed and the table cleared, Melissa placed Benjamin on the children's rug. He climbed into the rocking chair, played with a blanket, and began to fall asleep, just as he did after lunch. The teacher briefly stepped out, leaving Melissa alone with the children. Melissa became distracted by the other kids and later noticed something was wrong with Benjamin. The 16-month-old boy had orange foam coming out of nose. Crystal, who was with another group, quickly rushed to Melissa's screams and attempted to resuscitate the boy while calling 911. While they waited for help, Crystal made several attempts to revive the child. It was strange that Benjamin had no visible injuries, no open wounds, and no blood that could have caused his loss of consciousness. Melissa did not understand what could have happened. Benjamin was still alive when the ambulance arrived, and he was taken to the hospital as an emergency. Doctors fought for an hour to save his life, but at 4:50 p.m., Benjamin Kingen was declared dead. Initially, it was completely unclear what had happened to Benjamin. After the autopsy, the medical examiner concluded that the cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head inflicted several hours before the 911 call. Despite this, there were no external signs of injury, which seemed strange. Moreover, a skull fracture was found, causing extensive bleeding in the brain. The only way to help Benjamin was to act quickly, but according to the medical examiner, too much time had passed. Naturally, Melissa immediately came under suspicion since she was the last adult with whom Benjamin had interacted and was responsible for caring for the child in the teacher's absence. A few days into the investigation, Melissa was called in for questioning at the police station and quickly became the main suspect in the case. From the very beginning, she denied any involvement and claimed that she had no idea what had happened. However, the detectives were serious and considered her guilty of murder. The interrogations lasted 9 hours. Exhausted, Melissa eventually admitted that she had thrown Benjamin on the floor, claiming he probably died from a blow to the head. She was asked to demonstrate how it happened and threw a toy doll on the floor in front of them. According to the investigators, this reconstruction of events was convincing enough to justify her arrest and the charge of first-degree murder. However, on the same day, Melissa retracted her confession, asserting that she was innocent and had been a victim of police coercion. She insisted that her confession was made under pressure, and she denied, dozens of times, that she had harmed the child. According to her, she was held for long hours and constantly pressured. She believed that the only way to get out of the interrogation room was to confess to the murder. In total, Melissa spent about 14 hours in police custody, and her confession came after 9 hours of continuous pressure. She was even transferred to another department to reaffirm her statement and repeated her confession to another investigator on videotape. When the parents found out that Melissa was considered a murderer, they exclaimed that this must be some kind of mistake. The girl was always kind and very sweet, especially when it came to treating children. The family was sure that she was not guilty, but it became obvious that Melissa was in a very difficult situation. To defend Melissa's interests at the trial, the family even sold most of their property to hire the best lawyer. In November 2011, Melissa appeared in court. The prosecutor's case relied heavily on a video recording in which Melissa confessed to the crime. In her confession, she claimed that the children in the kindergarten were very restless that day, and that she had forcibly thrown Benjamin to the floor, which is probably how he hit his head. Melissa's defender, Paul DeLuca, insisted that the confession was coerced during interrogation and made under pressure from detectives who simply wanted to close the case as quickly as possible. The medical examiner had assessed the situation incorrectly from the start, deciding it was murder. Paul insisted that Benjamin had a recent head injury elsewhere. X-rays of Benjamin were used as evidence to support this theory, but the images provided by the prosecutor were too blurry to be relied upon. In the opinion of the forensic expert who performed the autopsy on Benjamin, they found a fracture in Benjamin that caused extensive internal bleeding. The specialist was certain that the injury was inflicted on the boy by a stranger using great force. The investigators had no doubt that a few hours before his death, Melissa had a fit of anger and used physical force against him. However, the autopsy report stated that there were absolutely no external injuries. There were no cuts, abrasions, or bruises on Benjamin's head or other parts of his body. Was it possible to break his skull in such a way that it would not be visible? The lawyer doubted it. When Melissa was brought in for questioning, she denied the police's suspicions more than 60 times. The conversation with her lasted for 9 long hours, during which she was never provided with a lawyer. According to her defense attorney, detectives put pressure on her during this time, forcing her to make a false confession, as they were mentally and physically exhausting her during the hearings in Lake County, Illinois. Prosecutors claimed that Benjamin was perfectly healthy. According to the expert, he personally examined the boy's body and felt the site of Benjamin's skull fracture with his own hands. Melissa's defense attorney assessed the chances of winning the case as very small from the very beginning. He believed that it would be easiest to try to get a mitigated sentence. It was difficult to refute the argument regarding the child's skull fracture, especially since the court referred to the medical experts whose opinions were considered authoritative. The lawyer found a single point that he managed to cling to. Shortly before the start of the hearing, the prosecutor handed him a disc with X-rays that were too dark and practically illegible. For this reason, the jury considered these arguments insignificant. They all stated that they could not see anything and did not take the pictures into account. Based on the experts' opinions and the recordings of Melissa's confession, on November 30th, 2011, the jury retired to deliberate. They spent a little less than 7 hours, after which Melissa Kalyasinski was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to 31 years in prison. As she left the courtroom, she continued to insist on her innocence. She had a vast number of supporters who considered her a victim of tyranny. Unfortunately, the evidence presented seemed unconvincing to the jury. The more the defense tried to find a way to save the client from prison, the more the prosecution's behavior resembled a conspiracy. 2 old teachers, including Nancy Collinger, made significant statements. She later spoke with the defendant's lawyer and also told investigators that during this period, Benjamin had hit his head. This occurred because of Benjamin's habit of leaning back. The boy fell and hit himself hard. The kindergarten called his mother and reported the incident, prompting her to take Benjamin to the doctor. However, after the examination, the expert stated that he did not see any problems or serious injuries. The pediatrician recommended that the relatives take better care of the child and simply send him home, insisting that there were no consequences. Why the doctor did not notice anything became unclear. It is curious that the police did not refer to Nancy at all during the trial or may have deliberately concealed these facts. Several kindergarten employees stated that for several days after this injury, Benjamin had been behaving sluggishly. He often displayed symptoms of a traumatic brain injury just 2 days before his death. He also exhibited alarming symptoms. The second teacher who worked with Melissa noticed that something was wrong with Benjamin. He vomited for no apparent reason, and a similar situation occurred again the next day. On the 3rd day, Benjamin died. When comparing the witness accounts, there is a convincing explanation for what happened to him. He had already sustained an injury that other kindergarten workers noticed 3 months before his death. However, Melissa had only worked there for a short time and did not have the opportunity to learn about this incident. She simply did not have time to learn his habits. According to the lawyer, Benjamin's condition gradually worsened because of an old craniocerebral injury. On the day he died, he likely leaned back again, resulting in a fatal blow that caused a hemorrhage. Unfortunately, none of these arguments had any effect. Melissa was determined to prove her innocence. The first progress in this case was made just a year after the prison sentence began in 2012. During this period, Lake County had a new chief medical examiner, Thomas Rudd. The lawyer met with him repeatedly, insisting that the case should be examined more closely. The expert became interested, took up the case, and carefully reviewed the images of Benjamin's brain. He found an image that was evidence of an old injury that the previous autopsy had missed. Thomas, along with another forensic expert who was also interested in the case, agreed. The experts had no doubt that the old injury could have been aggravated. Benjamin had likely caused this himself several days before his death. On that fateful day, several teachers still stated that Benjamin often leaned back and hit his head. Daycare worker Nancy was again interviewed. She was in the kindergarten on the day Benjamin died. According to her, she personally saw he fall backwards twice that day. The first backward was not very strong, it was softened by the furniture. However, the second time he fell, he hit his head quite hard. The doctor openly stated that the boy's old injury was indeed extensive and very dangerous due to its severity. Benjamin should have been under constant careful supervision, and no injuries to the head should have been allowed. Continuous supervision should have been ensured. The parents should have understood this. It would have been logical to take him out of kindergarten for a while and care for him more closely due to several strong blows to the head, which the child could not control. Fluid formed that pressed on the brain, which caused the respiratory system to fail. This was what ultimately led to his death. According to the doctor, it is worth noting that this convinced even Dr. Yupil Choi, who performed the initial autopsy. He reviewed the images of Benjamin's brain and agreed that he had missed evidence of trauma during the autopsy. However, he refused to change his initial report. At the trial, Choi signed a new report but deleted certain words, significantly downplaying the severity of the blow he initially reported. In 2015, another breakthrough occurred in this case, which seemed very promising. The doctor's staff found post-mortem images of Benjamin's brain and skull in the old medical examiner's office, which were much clearer than those shown to the defense attorney in 2011. It is now clear that Benjamin did not have a skull fracture at the time of his death. It is obvious that the boy was not beaten. He only had an old injury. This allowed the new medical examiner to change the cause of death on Benjamin's certificate from murder to undetermined. In addition, Kathleen Zellner, a lawyer who became interested in the case of Melissa Kalyasinski, took it up. She had built a career freeing wrongfully convicted people from prison and was always in search of justice. However, it was not easy. First, she needed to achieve a retrial of the case. At the end of 2016, her persistence paid off. The new defense attorney was given the opportunity to present evidence. Great hopes were placed on the X-rays, which showed no traces of a skull fracture. This radically changed the situation and became the irrefutable medical evidence refuting the claim of harm inflicted on Benjamin by Melissa. Kathleen insisted that, had the obscure darkened images revealing the true picture of what happened been shown at the first trial, the jury's decision would likely have been different. The doctor agreed that the argument regarding the supposed skull fracture was indeed very weighty at the initial hearing. Although this assertion was not true, the prosecution had referred to it at least 32 times, making it appear decisive. The prosecution tried to counter these assertions by claiming that the previous lawyer had the necessary software to lighten and enhance the images, but he simply did not do so. The defense denied that he actually had such programs, and furthermore, lightening the images could be regarded as falsifying evidence. During this stage of the hearing, another specialist, Manny Montez, spoke. In light of the reliable pictures discovered, questions arose. How could he have felt a non-existent fracture during the examination if it was not there? This seemed absurd, as his words were contradicted by another expert who stated that the assistant had never physically touched Benjamin or visually examined him. Nevertheless, both experts for the prosecution continued to insist on their conclusions. After the hearing, both doctors refused any comments on the case requested by journalists. After discussing all these inconsistencies, the judge made a decision and denied Melissa a retrial. He sided with the prosecution, arguing that Melissa's lawyer could have made the pictures clearer at the first trial, which was solely his responsibility. Melissa left the courtroom in tears, telling her lawyer that she simply did not understand why she should spend a decade in prison for something she did not do. For almost 10 years, her defense team filed appeal after appeal, all of which were finally rejected. In April 2018, their voice was heard. In the lawyer's opinion, the client was convicted based on false evidence. However, this again did not help, as the lack of credible medical evidence was evident. In 2022, a significant new event occurred in Lake County. A new prosecutor emerged who was interested in a case of Melissa Kalyasinski. However, to confirm or refute her guilt, something substantial was needed. The prosecutor recommended contacting a digital forensics company called Garrett Discovery. Two specialists immediately examined the X-rays of Benjamin and concluded that all the images had been altered by someone with malicious intent. Special software was employed to examine the X-ray images, allowing the brightness of the photographs to be reduced and darkened intentionally. At the same time, the images were blurred, making it nearly impossible to discern any details. The organization's experts informed the new prosecutor that they could not even imagine an innocent explanation for what had occurred. He was extremely indignant, insisting that this was essentially a crime of forgery of evidence, and that the perpetrator should be held accountable. The lawyer had high hopes for this meeting, convinced that something could truly be accomplished. To the surprise of the defense team and the Kalyasinski family, nothing happened. By April 2024, the lawyer decided to appeal to the governor for a pardon, requesting Melissa's release due to the lack of new evidence. Given the resistance from the law enforcement system to review the decision, it seemed that this was their only chance for freedom. A new appeal for retrial was filed on May 1, 2024, consisting of 337 pages. Several months passed before the argument was finally heard on July 9th. The defense requested Melissa's release through an appeal to the governor of Illinois, citing new evidence from her term. She had served 16 years, and her expected release date was set for December 2042, with the possibility of parole appearing on July 9, 2024. A hearing was scheduled before the governor's board of prisoners. Then an unexpected event occurred. The new prosecutor met with the family of Benjamin and spoke with the parents and their lawyer. It's hard to say what was discussed, but afterward, the prosecutor addressed the governor's board, stating that he strongly opposed Melissa's appeal and had become convinced of her guilt. He argued that there was no new evidence that could convincingly prove her innocence, and he refused to meet with journalists or make any public statements regarding the matter. On July 9th of the same year, the lawyer took a counter-move by appealing to the Prison Supervision Board. Melissa still did not understand why the authorities were resisting so strongly. Several experts in computer forensics joined her cause, and a psychologist examined Melissa. The analysis indicated that she was easily susceptible to pressure, making her prone to giving false testimony. Furthermore, she had resisted the influence of detectives at the station for about 9 hours before breaking down. Various psychiatrists evaluated Melissa, diagnosing her with borderline intellectual functioning. Her comprehension score was only 4.8 points, which is quite low. It was noted that Melissa had a slight mental impairment, which made her an easy target for police pressure. Individuals with borderline intellectual functioning typically have an intelligence level of around 70-80, with retardation beginning below 70. It was also discovered that 2.5 years before Benjamin's death, Melissa had reported an incident of abuse, leading to her diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder, from which she suffered when confronted by 2 detectives biased against her case. Under duress, she eventually confessed to a crime she did not commit. It was believed that Melissa's psychological condition warranted a review of the court's decision. However, 2 assistant prosecutors spoke out against it, including one who had participated in the hearing of Melissa's case in 2011. Benjamin's parents also expressed their view, categorically opposing any reconsideration of Melissa's case, particularly Benjamin's mother, who insisted that Melissa had struck and killed their son. In their opinion, she deserved to remain in prison for the rest of her life. The medical experts brought in by the defense modified their stance, now arguing that the skull fracture that had been previously misidentified was, in fact, a normal bone suture in the cranial vault, and the expert had simply made a mistake. At 16 months, it was anticipated that after further hearings, the Prison Supervision Commission would provide the governor with a confidential recommendation, which could be decisive in determining whether to release Melissa. During a meeting, the assembled commission asked Melissa what she would say to the governor if given the opportunity. She said she would merely ask him to consider her case, believing that he would quickly see she had done nothing wrong regarding Benjamin Kingen if he reviewed the case materials. The prosecutor maintained that the lawyer should have been the one to edit the photographs. However, experts from the digital forensic lab asserted that he couldn't have altered the images while maintaining their resolution and quality without it being evident as a forgery. Melissa had spent nearly a decade and a half behind bars due to false statements and discredited evidence that could have jeopardized the careers of the individuals responsible. In the lawyer's report, despite the prosecutor's assertions, there was valuable information. Additionally, a specialist in complex confessions who took on Melissa's case spoke with the lawyers, the family, and Melissa herself. They also communicated with 2 employees from the daycare who worked there prior to the hiring of Melissa. This information revealed that Benjamin had a tendency to lean backward and had hit his head quite hard, which was previously unknown, possibly hidden by law enforcement. As of now, the case is under review by the governor, with no set time frame for a decision. Melissa continues to serve her sentence. Her parents await her return, not believing in her guilt. Her room is still furnished as if she will return home from work at any moment. 16-year-old Megan Boswell gave birth to her daughter, Evelyn, on November 21, 2018, in a small U.S. state. After the birth, she moved back in with her father, Tommy, who covered all her expenses, including buying her a car. Despite this support, tensions within the family remained high. Megan frequently caused problems, acting out in typical teenage rebellion. As a result, Tommy relocated her to a trailer owned by a relative, but he continued to pay for everything since Megan refused to take responsibility for her own needs. By December 2019, she had moved out of the trailer to live with her new boyfriend, Hunter Wood. From that point on, they only met once for a fishing trip. During the Christmas holidays, Tommy saw Megan only occasionally and had little contact with his granddaughter, Evelyn. This situation continued until February 18, 2020, when Tommy became concerned and contacted Child Protective Services. On that day, he reported to the Department of Child Services that one-year-old Evelyn had disappeared under unusual circumstances and that he had not heard from her for a couple of months. Whenever Tommy tried to discuss Evelyn's whereabouts with Megan, she avoided the topic. Initially, she claimed that Evelyn was with her biological father, Eaton Percy, who was in the U.S. Army. However, Tommy suspected that Megan did not have a romantic relationship with Eaton for a while, because their relationship was usually quite ordinary, similar to other relationships in her life. He is unsure if Eaton is Evelyn's father, but Megan insists that Eaton kidnapped the child. Tommy attempted to contact Eaton to inquire about Evelyn's situation, but he was unsuccessful. Tommy did not believe the story about Megan. The more Tommy discussed the matter with her, the less believable her explanations became, and she often avoided answering questions directly. Worried about the situation, Tommy decided to take action. He called the juvenile department to report that he last saw his granddaughter, Evelyn, on Thanksgiving and that she had since gone missing. This report triggered a significant response. Although Megan was aware that Evelyn was missing, she did not report it, which raised concerns about her behavior. After a brief investigation, it became clear that one-year-old Evelyn was indeed missing. The state police and the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation became involved, launching a large-scale search operation. However, they were unable to locate Evelyn in the following days. Despite Tommy's struggles with alcohol addiction, he was a caring father and grandfather, was genuinely worried about Evelyn's well-being. Many believe that the child might be in trouble due to issues with her parents. As the investigation continued, detectives turned their attention to Megan. She maintained that she had left Evelyn in the care of a man named Eaton temporarily, but after that, Evelyn disappeared. Megan claimed that Eaton did not even let her into his home and described their short relationship as abusive and manipulative. She felt scared when he drank and became violent. During her last visit, there was a lengthy conversation between them in which they both agreed that Evelyn would stay with him, but he refused to let Megan see her daughter. After about 20 minutes, Megan was compelled to leave and return to her car, where her boyfriend, Hunter Wood, was waiting for her. This situation raised alarms for several reasons. Firstly, Megan had full custody of Evelyn, and Eaton never contested that custody or made any claims regarding the child. Secondly, although Megan had been avoiding any relationship with Eaton, she insisted on leaving Evelyn with him for several months to help foster a relationship between them, while she was trying to build her own relationship with Hunter. It was important to understand the situation clearly. Before Christmas 2019, Megan mentioned that Eaton had completely stopped communicating with her. He ignored her phone calls and messages. However, closer to the new year, he got drunk and finally contacted her again. Their conversation was harsh, with him threatening her by saying he would come and kill her if she continued calling him. Despite the threats, Megan did not contact the police or report any concerns about her child. She explained that she didn't want to ruin anyone's holiday and planned to address the situation after New Year's. All of this raised suspicions. The discussion with Megan went on for several hours. During this time, her story changed multiple times, but the main point remained the same. Evelyn had been with Eaton since December, and she still had no idea where her daughter was now. Her inconsistent narrative and cold, detached demeanor, with no visible concern for her child, raised alarms. However, there was not enough evidence for an arrest or charges, so Megan was released for the time being. The investigation is now focused on Eaton, the biological father of Evelyn, as authorities seek clarity on the troubling situation. After questioning Megan, law enforcement officers felt conflicted about her. She appeared genuinely distressed and eager to understand her daughter's disappearance, yet there were inconsistencies in her statements and actions that raised concerns. Consequently, the police remained cautious, keeping all possibilities, however grim, in mind without rushing to conclusions. Megan appeared on television, seeking assistance in locating her daughter. Although she hadn't shown much interest in Evelyn's welfare over the past 2 months, she portrayed herself as a concerned mother in front of reporters. With tears in her eyes, she implored anyone with information to come forward, expressing her love and longing for her daughter. Megan even recorded a message intended for Evelyn, hoping the child would see it on TV and return home. However, this display struck detectives as somewhat overdone. They suspected that she was trying to divert suspicion away from herself and was acting for the cameras. Concerns about her grew stronger as investigators spoke with those closest to her. They painted her as a neglectful mother who had little regard for Evelyn. Perhaps due to her young age, it seemed she was unprepared for motherhood. She lacked a close bond with her child and prioritized her personal life over parental responsibilities. Many family members questioned why Megan hadn't reported her daughter missing to the police, especially given the alarming behavior of Eaton, who was believed to have abducted Evelyn. Megan provided a new explanation for her inaction, suggesting that Eaton might have taken Evelyn and that she wanted to avoid drawing attention to the situation in the hope of resolving it quietly. She claimed that involving the police could lead to unnecessary panic and complications. However, this reasoning appeared unconvincing to investigators. While Megan was participating in multiple interviews, the county sheriff searching for Evelyn held a press conference. He quickly realized that the information Megan provided was inconsistent. It was unclear when Evelyn had last been seen. Tommy claimed that he saw his granddaughter on Thanksgiving, while Megan stated that she had given Evelyn to Eaton around December 26, 2019. The nanny, who occasionally cared for Evelyn, stated that she had seen her on December 10th or 11th, but after that, Megan unexpectedly stopped using her services. Megan had her reasons for wanting to keep Evelyn with her during the holidays, as she wanted to spend time with family. However, even after the holidays, she did not contact the nanny again. This inconsistency added to the many contradictions that investigators encountered. Detectives attempted to reach Evelyn's biological father, Eaton. Megan claimed that she took her daughter to Texas in February, but Eaton was actually in Louisiana serving in the Army. When detectives managed to speak to Eaton, it became clear that he couldn't take care of Evelyn since he was stationed in another state. He received media attention and was required to give several interviews. He stated that in February 2020, he received multiple phone calls while at Fort Johnson, Louisiana. The Guardianship Service reached out to him to inquire about Evelyn's whereabouts. This caught him off guard because he had no information about her. Later, the police contacted him about an incident involving Evelyn, but he still didn't understand the situation because Megan refused to discuss it with him. The detectives invited Eaton for questioning. He was cooperative, allowing them access to his phone, agreeing to provide DNA samples, and permitting searches of his barracks and car. He confirmed that his only meeting with Evelyn was on Christmas 2019. Megan's claims were shocking to him. She aimed to establish his paternity, believing him to be Evelyn's biological father. Eaton was doubtful but agreed to the DNA test. When detectives informed him about his communications with Megan, he noted that much of the narrative was fabricated since he wasn't even sure if Evelyn was his daughter. He also said he would not take the girl away from Megan, as he was living on a military base and was unable to care for her. Eaton colleagues confirmed that he had never left the service and that Evelyn was not accompanying him. They had never lived together with Megan, and he did not harm Evelyn, despite her claims. They had a brief one-night encounter and never saw each other again. The detectives worked to determine who was lying, and after spending several hours interviewing Eaton, his colleagues, they began to suspect that Megan might be the true liar and manipulator in the situation. After extensive questioning, they ultimately cleared Eaton of suspicion as a potential kidnapper. During the search for Evelyn, several witnesses came forward with information. In particular, details about a silver BMW were linked to individuals who might know Evelyn's whereabouts. This car was located in Wills County, North Carolina, on February 21st. Two individuals, named Angela and William, were arrested for using the car. Angela, who is Megan's mother, stated that she purchased the vehicle, which now belongs to her daughter's boyfriend. However, she did not have any paperwork to verify her ownership. It was later revealed that this silver 2007 BMW was reported stolen in North Carolina. All individuals associated with the vehicle were arrested, but the charges were not related to Evelyn's disappearance. The detectives were taken aback by the information provided by Megan. During a previous interrogation, she had accused Eaton of abducting her daughter and refusing to return her. However, in a subsequent interview, she suddenly changed her story. Megan likely realized that her initial story about Eaton wasn't credible and decided to create a new narrative. She unexpectedly told reporters that an unknown person had kidnapped her daughter, Evelyn. However, just a few minutes later in the same interview, she denied making that claim. Due to these strange actions, detectives arranged to speak with Megan again. During this meeting, she quickly introduced a new version of the incident that hadn't been mentioned before. This time, her mother, Angela, who is 42 years old, was involved in the story. Megan claimed that she had taken her daughter away from Eaton and later met Angela at a cafe. During this meeting, Angela was very aggressive, insisting that she would take Evelyn because she believed Megan couldn't be a proper mother. Megan noted that her relationship with her mother had always been terrible. She described her as vindictive and manipulative, and suspected that Angela took Evelyn out of a desire for revenge. Megan described Angela's behavior toward Evelyn as extremely cruel. In the cafe parking lot, Angela reportedly abandoned Evelyn, which may have caused a head injury. Megan felt powerless to intervene while Angela left with her daughter. She was too afraid to report the incident to the police, hoping it would resolve on its own. During that time, Angela was residing in a trailer park in Virginia. Although law enforcement found Megan's account hard to believe, they could not dismiss it completely. They conducted a search of 3 trailers but found no evidence that Angela had been with a child. The inconsistencies in Megan's statements led the police to doubt her credibility, and they requested that she take a polygraph test, which she declined. Megan claimed she was pregnant and believed the test could harm her unborn child or yield inaccurate results. Meanwhile, Hunter Wood, Megan's boyfriend, wanted to speak with a local news outlet for his own safety. To his surprise, he faced pressure not only from the police but also from the local community. The situation escalated to the point where he couldn't speak to journalists himself. Instead, his father had to intervene. Some townspeople suspected that Hunter might be connected to Evelyn's disappearance, and Megan frequently mentioned him in her already dubious stories. Through his father, Hunter shared that he only had a brief acquaintance with Megan. He characterized their relationship as short, consisting of some flirting and occasional meetings. They first met when Megan applied for a job at a local restaurant owned by Hunter. It was during this time that he met Evelyn for the only time. Later, when Megan's mother came to work, she would always mention that Evelyn was with her biological father, Eaton. She insisted that Eaton take Evelyn, but Hunter never met Eaton and only learned about him through Megan. Since rumors and threats against Hunter on social media, stemming from Megan's lies, began, he felt compelled to shut down both his personal page and the restaurant's social media accounts. Many people began to boycott his restaurant, causing significant harm to his business due to the actions of a disgruntled employee. Hunter desperately wanted to find Evelyn to clear his name and dispel any suspicions, but the situation remained unresolved. As the online harassment continued, Hunter's mental health began to suffer. He moved in with his mother for support during this difficult time, but even that was not enough. Eventually, he was hospitalized for treatment and evaluation, but his condition only worsened there. His father was deeply worried about the toll Megan's lies were taking on him. His father noted that, although there were days when he seemed better, his father often could not even recognize him during visits. Due to these challenges, Hunter was unable to participate in the hearings regarding Evelyn's case that took place later. The police never formally accused him of any crime related to her disappearance. The negativity directed at him stemmed solely from Megan's fabricated claims. A shocking development in the case revealed that a paternity test showed Eaton was not Evelyn's biological father, and the identity of Evelyn's actual father remained a mystery. Megan had been lying from the start of the search for her daughter. Her false information led law enforcement to waste a significant amount of time and resources on an ultimately misguided investigation. As a result of growing suspicions, Megan was arrested on February 25, 2020. At that time, her daughter's whereabouts were still unknown, and detectives had not yet been able to charge her with anything specific regarding the case. Megan faced charges of making false accusations and was held in jail with bail set at $25,000, which her father, Tommy, refused to pay. While in custody, Megan claimed she was pregnant, but later investigations revealed that this claim was also false. With this, Megan became the primary suspect in her daughter's disappearance. Fortunately, she was unable to leave, allowing investigators to intensify their efforts and focus on questioning her. Eventually, these efforts bore fruit, and she finally confessed. Megan stated that at that time, she and Hunter slept in the same bed as Evelyn, and the next morning, they found the baby unresponsive. Fearing accusations, Megan decided to dispose of her daughter. She placed the baby's body in the trash but did not inform the police of its location. It was now clear that Evelyn was deceased, but authorities needed to locate the body to confirm her death. On February 27th, a search warrant was issued for the trailer where Megan and Evelyn lived. Forensic experts investigated the area and the trailer, using luminol and ground-penetrating radar to search for hidden spaces in the ground. There were also concerns that the child may have been drowned in a nearby lake. Searches at all these locations, which involved specially trained dogs and a dive team, came up empty. Investigators also examined the property of Tommy, Megan's father, located 5 kilometers from the trailer, but initially found nothing there as well. On March 6, 2020, investigators discovered a horrifying scene in a playhouse on Tommy's property. They found a trash can that had been placed in the wrong location. When the police opened it, they discovered a small child's leg protruding from the can. The girl had been discarded like trash. Her body was positioned vertically. She was tightly wrapped in a fleece blanket and then placed inside a garbage bag with aluminum foil wrapped around her face. She had been thrown away with the household waste. Before her death, the girl had been placed head down in the can and trapped by other items, unable to escape. She suffered a painful death. Contrary to what her mother, Megan, had claimed, her death was not accidental. The cold weather helped preserve the child's remains, and a forensic expert determined that she died from suffocation. Evidence suggested that she had faced physical abuse before her murder. Several bruises in various stages of healing indicated that she had been repeatedly beaten, which could explain the head injury that Megan mentioned. This head injury was allegedly inflicted by Angela, possibly as a precaution to conceal the abuse in case the body was discovered. What began as a search for a missing child turned into a murder investigation. As a result, Megan faced over 10 charges but pleaded not guilty to any of them. During the court hearings for Evelyn's murder, the prosecutor portrayed Megan as a manipulative liar who misled investigators and fabricated inconsistent stories to hide her involvement in the crime. The defense lawyer argued that the incident was an accident, claiming Megan panicked when she realized her child had died in her sleep. While the defense correctly noted that conflicting statements do not prove murder, the courtroom atmosphere was chaotic. The prosecution presented over 30 witnesses familiar with Megan's family, who described her as an irresponsible mother living in a trailer park with her daughter. She neglected to pay bills, taking advantage of her relatives' property while her father resolved all financial issues. Hunter, a witness, expressed concerns about Megan's parenting during a conversation with his father. He remarked that Evelyn appeared unkempt, smelled bad, and was poorly dressed, indicating she hadn't been bathed in a long time. Several other witnesses echoed this sentiment, noting Megan's indifference, which persisted even after her daughter disappeared. She did not participate in the search and showed no genuine concern when questioned about Evelyn. One of the prosecution's key pieces of evidence was Megan's fingerprints on the foil and film used to wrap Evelyn's body. Her fingerprints were also found on the trash can and in the playhouse where Evelyn's body was discovered. Despite this, the defense attorney contended that the prosecution lacked direct evidence. The lawyer argued that the evidence was circumstantial, suggesting that Megan's fingerprints were from previous visits to her father's home. However, Megan admitted to disposing of her daughter's body in that manner. Megan spun a web of lies that hindered the search for Evelyn. It was suggested that Megan viewed Evelyn as an obstacle to her relationship with her new, successful boyfriend, Hunter Wood. The defense attorney argued that Evelyn's death was an accident and attributed Megan's actions to her fear and inexperience as a young mother. However, the prosecution presented stronger evidence regarding the circumstances surrounding Evelyn's death. After deliberating for 2 days, the jury found Megan guilty on all charges, including first-degree murder, resulting in 3 murder convictions. The court then held one final discussion to determine her punishment. Megan's mother, Angela, attended the hearing and spoke to the jury in hopes of receiving a lighter sentence. Although she understood that Megan would likely face a life sentence, she was hopeful that Megan could still qualify for parole. Angela described the struggles that she and her husband, Tommy, faced, illustrating the difficult environment in which their daughter, Megan, was raised. Angela claimed that Megan frequently witnessed her parents using alcohol and even banned substances, creating an unhealthy and, at times, dangerous home atmosphere. Tommy had once been convicted of assault. Megan's issues at home began when she was around 7 years old, leading her to live with her grandparents for a significant period. By 2019, Angela was imprisoned, and Megan was placed in a foster home while still attending high school. After moving to the city, Angela was unable to send Megan to school due to a lack of time. This made Angela believe that Megan's difficult behavior stemmed from never having experienced the care of a loving mother. Later, Megan's adoptive mother testified, revealing that when Megan joined their family, she was in poor condition, tired, wearing dirty clothes, and having unmanageable hair. Megan also exhibited signs of emotional distress. She appeared fearful and had visible bruises. At that time, she was pregnant. Megan took several weeks to recover. Despite her hardships, she aimed to be a good mother. Having cared for her younger siblings, she applied that knowledge to caring for her baby, Evelyn. She ensured that she attended all of Evelyn's doctor appointments. However, the nanny who worked with them expressed concerns during the trial, noting that Evelyn had a severe diaper rash that she had never seen before. This situation arose shortly before Evelyn went missing. The home environment was often chaotic and unsanitary, and, according to the nanny, Megan neglected Evelyn's hygiene when she was alone. After Angela testified, the jury recommended a life sentence for Megan with the possibility of parole. The prosecutor argued for a life sentence without the chance for parole. Ultimately, Megan was sentenced to life in prison but could be eligible for parole after 51 years. This outcome sparked mixed reactions among those who cared about Evelyn. Some felt it was a just decision, while many believed that the harm caused by Megan's actions would leave lasting scars on others for a lifetime. The Muellers were not just an ordinary family, they were deeply passionate about weapons, which played a significant role in their lives. The father, William Mueller, was more than just an avid collector. He held a federal firearms license, allowing him to operate as a licensed gun dealer. Additionally, he worked as a self-employed electrician, and his life revolved around firearms, buying, selling, and using them. William was married to Nancy, and they had an 8-year-old daughter named Sarah, their only child. They adored her and considered her the heart of their family. They lived in Tilly, Arkansas, a small, close-knit community where William and Nancy chose to homeschool Sarah. Their weekends often revolved around attending weapons shows, a shared interest that strengthened their family bond. As a result, their home was filled with weapons, ammunition, and large amounts of cash. This valuable collection made them an attractive target for thieves. In 1995, tragedy struck when their home was burglarized by Kirby, a man who was a family friend. He stole a weapon and cash, but the robbery did not deter the Muellers from their love of weapons or their business. This robbery is important to remember, as it plays a crucial role in the investigation that follows. Fast forward to January 1996. the Mueller family was out enjoying quality time together, unaware that two men were lurking in the shadows of their home, waiting for the moment they returned. As soon as the Muellers entered their home, they were confronted by two men who appeared to be FBI agents. However, these men were not genuine agents, they were imposters. Without delay, the men tied the family to chairs. When William, aged 52 at the time, refused to comply, the situation escalated frighteningly. The intruders separated the family members and began torturing them while asking questions. Despite the torment they endured, they did not divulge any information, which led the men to target their 8-year-old daughter, Sarah. The men interrogated Sarah about the family's wealth, asking where they kept their money and valuables. To force her to speak, one of them used an electric cattle prod on her. While this tool is not lethal, it causes excruciating pain, especially for a young child. Eventually, Sarah revealed the location of their cash, which amounted to $50,000, as well as weapons and ammunition. One might assume that they would take what they wanted and leave, but the nightmare continued. Next, the intruders used stun guns on the family, rendering them unconscious. They took their time with this, almost as if they were enjoying the slow torture. Sadly, it didn't stop there. What happened next was even worse. They suffocated the family by placing sealed plastic bags over their heads. 2 weeks passed before anyone noticed that something was seriously wrong. Nancy's mother, Evelyn Peterson, hadn't heard from her daughter at all during that time. This was very unusual for Nancy, as she always called after their trips, especially after attending weapon shows. Concerned, Evelyn contacted the sheriff to express her worries. Sheriff J. Winters, familiar with the Muellers despite living in a neighboring county, agreed to help. However, when he spoke to the neighbors, they seemed unconcerned. Many believed the Muellers had simply gone on a short getaway and hadn't felt the need to check in. It seemed like everyone assumed they just needed some time away and that everything was fine. Then, on February 11th, a month later, the situation took a frightening turn. A farmer found the Mueller's Jeep abandoned on the side of the highway, far from where it should have been. This discovery reignited the investigation. Inside the Jeep was Nancy's purse, which contained her wallet and ID, but there was no sign of the family. As the weeks passed, their disappearance became increasingly concerning as no leads emerged. After 5 months, a breakthrough occurred when an elderly couple went fishing in a swamp near Russellville. While waiting for a fish to bite, the woman got her line caught on something. When she tried to free it, she realized she had hooked a boot that still contained a man's leg bone. Frightened, she called the police to report the incident and seek help. This prompted sheriff to initiate another search, organizing teams to comb through the bayou using metal hooks and divers. By the end of the day, they uncovered parts of a body. The torso had been weighed down by a rock, and duct tape was wrapped around the head. Investigators immediately recognized that this was no ordinary crime. It appeared to be a calculated execution. The remains belonged to a small female, and initially, investigators suspected it might be the body of a 6-year-old girl who had been reported missing from a neighboring county the previous year. However, upon closer examination, the size and clothing did not match. This led them to consider the possibility that it could be Sarah Mueller. The following day, 2 additional partial bodies were found. All 3 torsos were similarly weighed down with rocks, and their heads were tightly wrapped in plastic bags and secured with duct tape. The scene was haunting. Using dental records, DNA, and clothing, authorities confirmed the identities of the bodies as William Mueller, his wife Nancy, and their 8-year-old daughter, Sarah. What had begun as a missing persons case quickly escalated into a horrific triple homicide investigation. The coroner determined that the bodies had likely been in the water since January 11th, the last day they were seen. However, further investigation revealed small specks of blue paint on the tape. These paint samples were sent to the FBI lab in Washington, D.C., where it was confirmed that the paint matched that used on General Motors vehicles. This lead suggests that 2 individuals were involved. One drove the blue car carrying the bodies, while the other followed in William's Jeep. By the time the bodies were dumped, the Muellers were presumably already dead, having been suffocated by the plastic bags. The investigation then focused on the Mueller's possessions. After the family's disappearance, most valuables were taken by relatives, but some items were left in William's garage. Among the findings was a weapon case that had a serial number, although the weapon itself was missing. They also discovered a family photo with friends. The authorities entered the weapon's serial number into the National Crime Information Center database and were able to trace it back to a man named Travis Brake, who had been arrested months earlier in Seattle, Washington, for carrying a concealed weapon. Travis confesses that he sold the weapon at a show and describes the two men he bought it from. One man caught his attention. Investigators showed him a photo they had discovered among the Mueller's belongings, and he identified one of the men, Kirby Kehoe. This was the same man who had robbed the Muellers a year earlier. Kirby was familiar with trouble. He had an extensive criminal record involving firearms and was actively involved in the white supremacist movement. However, investigators needed more concrete evidence to arrest Kirby. Almost a year after the murder of the Mueller family, investigators caught a break in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. A trooper noticed a blue Chevy Suburban with suspicious bumper stickers parked in a handicap spot. Inside, police found a man named Sean Haynes and his girlfriend asleep. When police checked the serial numbers of two weapons found in a car, they discovered one of them was stolen and belonged to the Mueller family. When arrested and questioned, Sean admitted that he had traded one weapon for another at a motel 6 months earlier. The person involved in the transaction was Kaye Kehoe, Kirby Kehoe's eldest son. At this point, the investigators had two suspects. The Kehoe family was very different from the Muellers. Kaye Kehoe, 26 years old, grew up in a household where white supremacy was not just discussed but was a fundamental part of their lives. Kaye wasn't just a typical troubled young man. His parents' beliefs significantly influenced him, leading the family down a path of hate and violence. When Kaye was a child, the Kehoe family relocated from Florida to the serene hills of Madison County, North Carolina. Later, in the mid-1980s, they relocated again, this time to Stevens County in Washington. Kaye initially appeared to be a bright student, excelling as an honor student at Kettle Junior High School. However, in 1988, his parents decided to homeschool him, believing it would allow for more personalized attention. Unfortunately, instead of fostering a positive learning environment, this choice created an insular world filled with extreme ideas. From an early age, Kaye was drawn into a life of crime, learning about robbery, theft, and evading law enforcement. The Kehoe household fostered an atmosphere of hate and paranoia, steeped in anti-government beliefs that Kaye absorbed. Rather than nurturing healthy aspirations, his dreams became violent and driven by white supremacy. By the time he reached adulthood, he had a singular aim: to overthrow the U.S. government and establish his vision of a white supremacist utopia, which he called the Aryan People's Republic. This wasn't a mere phase for Kaye. This twisted ideology was central to his identity, and his family played a crucial role in shaping it. This influence became evident in 1995 when he participated in a violent kidnapping and robbery. In June of that year, he and a partner targeted Malcolm and Jill Friedman, a Jewish couple who owned a store where he had previously worked. The Friedman family was restrained with weapons, but this crime was not random. Kaye chose them specifically because of their ethnicity. This incident vividly illustrated the hate and violence he had been raised to accept. Based on the circumstances, there is reason to believe that Kirby and his son Kaye had been under police surveillance for some time. If Kaye was involved in a significant amount of criminal activity, Kirby, his father, was not immune to it either. Despite the lengthy criminal records of both men, they remained elusive until February 15, 1997, when an Ohio State police officer pulled over a blue Chevy Suburban. The vehicle was swerving, driving unusually slowly, and appeared suspicious. The driver ignored the trooper, but the passenger acknowledged him with a nod. Initially, the officer thought nothing of it until he noticed the passenger was continually watching him through the rearview mirror. This sparked the officer's instincts. He ran the license plate and discovered it had expired, and neither the driver nor the passenger had valid driver's licenses. When the trooper asked the driver to exit the vehicle, he complied but cautioned the officer not to touch him. Things escalated from there. As one of the deputies called for a tow truck to impound the vehicle, the driver suddenly dashed back to the car. The officers pursued him, but during the commotion, the passenger drew a weapon and began attacking the officers, creating enough chaos for the driver to jump back into the Chevy Suburban and flee. As the driver drove away, the passenger informed the officer that he had borrowed the truck from a friend. He then refused to be searched. While the officer was trying to check for weapons, he insisted that he did not want the officer to search through all his belongings. The driver then assured the officer that there was no problem and that he would not cause any trouble. It seemed that he was lying. It turns out the two men in this dramatic situation were Kaye and his brother Shane. After Kaye drove away in the Chevy Suburban, Shane, who was in the passenger seat, ran into the nearby woods. The police searched for him all day, but they couldn't catch him. Like Kaye, Shane was also heavily involved in white supremacy and was willing to use violence to support his beliefs. Later that day, Kaye ended up in another shootout, this time in the parking lot of an electrical supply company. He exchanged gunfire with two Wilmington police officers, Officer Richard Rick Wood and Sergeant Robert Bob Martin. During the chaos, an innocent bystander, 56-year-old Frank Marsden, was attacked in the shoulder. The shootout was recorded by the dash cameras of both officers and quickly became a significant news story. In 1997, footage of the police shootout aired on Fox's World's Scariest Police Shootouts, which quickly gained popularity and was featured on other shows like Most Shocking and World's Most Amazing Videos. During this time, the Kehoe brothers, Kaye and Shane, were evading capture while secretly traveling with their families in an RV across several states. Investigators were concerned that they would go to great lengths to avoid arrest, leading the police to intensify their search efforts. The police released images of Kaye and Shane, hoping that someone would be able to identify them or their vehicle. At Lake Hill Campground, officials discovered that the Kehoe family had been there in their RV, but they had left 2 days ago. As days turned into weeks, reports of the RV's sightings flooded in from all over the country. They were seen in various states, including West Virginia, North Carolina, Alabama, Texas, and Montana, always managing to stay one step ahead of law enforcement. In Indianapolis, police found a stolen van linked to Kaye, which contained a gas receipt with his name on it, but there was no trace of Shane. A few days later, the Kehoe family's RV was discovered abandoned on a lonely road in Wyoming. When the police investigated, they found alarming items inside: weapons, ammunition, fake FBI jackets, U.S. Marshals badges, and materials for making bombs. The ATF bomb squad inspected the RV and, while they did not find any functional devices, the presence of these components suggested that the Kehoe family was preparing for something very dangerous. Authorities grew increasingly concerned about the escalating violence and potential actions of Kaye and Shane. As the search continued, it seemed that Kaye and Shane were consistently staying just out of reach. However, on June 16, 1997, investigators received a lead indicating that Shane, Chevy's brother, was ready to surrender. Shane disclosed their hiding spot for the previous months and revealed that after the shootouts in Ohio, they had sought refuge on a secluded ranch in southern Utah. The farm owner provided them with food and shelter as long as they worked. However, the situation took a turn for the worse when Kaye began to exhibit uncontrollable behavior due to his temper and paranoia. Kaye even expressed intentions to kill his wife, Katrina Wright, who had Native American roots, and plotted to murder their parents, Kirby and Gloria, in order to raise his younger brothers according to his white supremacist beliefs. On June 12, Chevy's paranoia turned against Shane. Following a violent argument, Shane feared for his safety and that of his family, leading him to escape in the middle of the night with his loved ones, driving nearly 1,000 miles back to Washington state. This brought their extended period on the run to an end. Kaye was arrested on June 17, 1997. However, this was not the most significant aspect of the case. The critical information that Shane provided to law enforcement was that Kaye had confessed to being involved in the murder of the Muellers along with another unnamed individual. Around the same time in June 1997, their father, Kirby, was also arrested. This arrest was unexpected, as he had no connections to the murder of the Mueller family, nor did Shane. Just when Gloria, Chevy's mother, came forward to the police with shocking information. She revealed that her son Chevy had confessed to her about the gruesome details of the Mueller family murders. Gloria explained that these killings were not impulsive. Instead, they had been planned for an entire year, beginning with the first robbery of the Mueller family in February 1995, which set everything into motion. Gloria stated that the incident was triggered when William Mueller, the head of the Mueller family, confronted Kirby, suspecting him of involvement in the robbery. During this confrontation, William was disrespectful to Kirby, which angered Chevy. This incident seemed to ignite something in Chevy, leading him to believe that William's disrespect justified a plan to rob and kill the Muellers. However, there was more to Chevy's actions than just a personal vendetta. According to law enforcement, Chevy was also motivated by the knowledge that William owned valuable weapons, high-end gear, and ammunition, which further intrigued Chevy. Gloria went on to identify a second person involved in the murders, Daniel Lewis Lee. Daniel was not unfamiliar to Chevy. The two knew each other through their connections in white supremacist groups. Chevy and Daniel were committed to establishing a whites-only nation, united by their shared beliefs. They planned to rob and kill the Mueller family and cover up their involvement. Gloria explained that the Muellers left for a weapons show on January 11, 1996. While they were away, Chevy and Daniel disguised themselves as police officers and went to the Mueller home. When the Muellers returned, Chevy and Daniel ambushed them and tied them up. However, a key part of their plan did not go as intended. Gloria revealed that Daniel hesitated, especially when it came to killing Sarah, the daughter of the Mueller family. Unable to follow through, he let Chevy take over, and Chevy killed Sarah. In March 1999, Daniel and Chevy stood trial for the murder of the Mueller family. Both Cheney and Gloria testified against them, providing detailed accounts of the incident. The trial resulted in Chevy Kehoe being sentenced to life in prison, while Daniel Lewis Lee received a death sentence. Daniel had a troubled childhood marked by instability and violence. From a young age, he faced many challenges, including seizures and neurological issues, which led to stays in mental health facilities. However, he was often removed from those facilities due to his violent behavior. His struggles were exacerbated by his inability to manage his anger, which fueled his violent tendencies as he grew older. By the time Daniel was 17, his violent behavior escalated alarmingly. He was involved in the brutal murder of Joseph Wavra during a robbery, marking his third murder in a series of violent offenses. Shockingly, Daniel managed to avoid a murder charge and instead received only a suspended sentence for the robbery, a decision that seemed unjust given the severity of his actions. Unfortunately, this leniency failed to curb Daniel's violent tendencies. It only encouraged him, allowing his appetite for violence to grow unchecked. Daniel met Chevy in 1995, united by their mutual disdain for the government and their desire to create a white supremacist stronghold. In court, Daniel attempted to portray himself as someone who could change for the better, claiming he had a good side. This seemed insincere given his history of violence. His plea felt more like a fictional redemption story than reality. The court was not convinced. Daniel's past was too horrific, and nobody believed he could truly reform. Eventually, Daniel was executed by lethal injection in 2020. This marked the first federal execution of a prisoner in 17 years. Daniel was executed in Indiana after the U.S. Supreme Court allowed it to proceed. He had been convicted of murdering 3 members of an Arkansas family, including an 8-year-old girl, back in 1996. However, he maintained his innocence to witnesses on the day of his execution. The Supreme Court overturned lower court decisions that raised concerns about potential suffering caused by lethal injection. Interestingly, while Chevy was the mastermind behind the brutal murders of the Mueller family, he avoided the death penalty. In contrast, Daniel, who played a less direct role, faced execution. This sparked confusion. How could the planner of the crime receive a lighter sentence than his accomplice? The situation became even more complicated when it was revealed that Chevy was connected to another major crime, the Oklahoma City bombing. Following Chevy's arrest, his brother Shane alleged that Chevy had prior knowledge of the bombing. Chevy was reportedly seen with Timothy McVeigh, the Oklahoma City bomber, at a motel in Spokane several months before the bombing. The motel manager claimed that Chevy appeared excited about the bombing when the news broke and even hinted that something significant would occur on April 19th. However, when the FBI investigated, they found no evidence that Timothy had ever visited Spokane or that Chevy was directly involved in the bombing. Chevy denied all allegations, but the rumors only deepened the intrigue surrounding him. Although Chevy had links to violent extremist groups, he faced lighter consequences compared to Daniel. In the end, Shane Kehoe was sentenced to 24 years for attempted murder and weapons possession related to an Ohio shootout, while their father, Kirby, received a 44-month sentence after pleading guilty to federal racketeering charges. Shane's sentence was eventually reduced to 11 years, and he was released from prison in 2008. However, his legal troubles continued. On October 14, 2013, he and Kirby were arrested in Arizona after a raid by the ATF uncovered a large marijuana-growing operation and a stockpile of weapons at an off-grid compound. Authorities confiscated 17 weapons, nearly 177,000 rounds of ammunition, 15 pounds of marijuana, and various types of body armor. Both Shane and Kirby pleaded guilty to being felons in possession of firearms and ammunition. In 2014, Shane received a 41-month prison sentence, while Kirby was sentenced to 10 years. Shane was released in September 2016, and Kirby followed in January 2022. As for Chevy, he spent a significant amount of time at the United States Penitentiary Florence ADX in Colorado, registered under the Federal Bureau of Prisons number 21300-009. He was later moved to various other facilities, including the United States Penitentiary Florence High and the United States Penitentiary McCreary in Kentucky. By 2022, Chevy was incarcerated at the United States Penitentiary Terre Haute, and one can only hope he is experiencing more suffering there than his victims did. It was here in 1985 that Captain Gary Eastburn lived with his wife Catherine and their 3 daughters, about 10 minutes from the base where he served. Shortly before the events in question, Captain Gary received a promotion, which required him to undergo training at officer school. Consequently, he had to leave his family for a while, attending officer school in Montgomery, Alabama, for about 10 weeks. This was an important step, as the family was planning to move to England, where Gary could serve in the Royal Air Force. Gary had a strong marriage that lasted for 10 years, and they kept in touch while separated. However, on Saturday, May 11, 1985, Gary tried to call his wife several times, but to no avail. He took advantage of several breaks to call but never received an answer. Finally, he reached out to one of his friends who remained on Fort Bragg and asked him to check on his wife. The man did so, but when he knocked on the door, no one answered. He couldn't wait forever, so he simply left Catherine a note, asking her to call her husband back as soon as she could. While shining a flashlight and walking around the house, the friend accidentally woke up a neighbor named Bob Seefeld. When Gary called Bob, he mentioned that he had no idea what was going on with Catherine, but everything seemed strange. After a fitful night's sleep, Bob woke up the next day, with troubling thoughts swirling in his mind. He noticed that a stack of newspapers had piled up near the neighbor's door and realized he had last seen Catherine leave for the store on Thursday. Bob went to the neighbor's door and knocked, but no one answered. Listening closely, it seemed to Bob that he could hear a child crying inside. Knowing the family well, he assumed it was the youngest daughter, who was about 2 years old at the time. Concerned about the situation, Bob called the police at 12:53 p.m. and asked them to check on the family. When the patrolman arrived at the scene, they began the standard procedure and shone his flashlight through the windows. They saw the baby in a crib, appearing pale and emaciated. Despite the protocol the officer needed to follow, they instinctively felt that something alarming had occurred. A patrolman immediately cut through the window screen and entered the house. Upon entering, he saw the baby girl, who was alive but in dire condition. Later, authorities reported that a few more hours in that house could have been fatal for her. After handing the baby over to his partner, the patrolman returned inside the house, checking the rooms with his weapon drawn. In the main bedroom, he discovered the lifeless body of 3-year-old Erin Eastburn. A pillow covered the child's face, and it was apparent that her throat had been cut, with her head nearly severed from her body. She lay on the floor next to her parents' bed, where Catherine also lay. A pillow covered Catherine's face as well. When the officer removed it, he saw that her throat was cut. She was naked and had suffered multiple stab wounds, indicating she had been abused. The scene was horrifying, with blood everywhere. The patrolman ran outside, trying to catch his breath, when he was reminded that the family had 3 children. They still needed to find one more child who might be alive and in danger. He returned to the house, found Kara, but there were no signs of life. The 5-year-old had died in the same manner as her mother and sister. When the investigation began, detectives quickly noticed that a similar crime had occurred 15 years earlier involving a military family, the MacDonald family, who were killed in a similar fashion. This crime was committed by a military man, a husband and father named Jeffrey. Numerous coincidences were found in the handwriting of the criminals and the circumstances of these 2 murders, suggesting that they could have been committed by the same person. However, at the time of the massacre of the Eastburn family, Jeffrey MacDonald was already behind bars and could not have been involved in this crime. Rumors spread quickly, leading many to believe that Jeffrey MacDonald could have had an accomplice or an imitator. Forensic experts found blood all over the house, as well as clear traces of cleaning in some places, indicated by X stains of blood. It was obvious that the criminal had tried to clean up but left even more traces. Using luminol, investigators could see that the marks had been erased on the bathroom door handles. Likely, the perpetrator used a towel that had been thrown into the laundry basket. The crime was believed to have been committed between 8 p.m. on May 9th and 3 a.m. on May 10th, 1985. As it turns out, the last person to see the family alive was the nanny, Julie. The young girl had been babysitting the youngest daughter for several days before their bodies were found and was automatically placed on the suspect list. Julie mentioned prank calls that Catherine had complained about before she was killed. Some man had been calling several times a day for 3 months, but it didn't particularly bother Catherine. She didn't feel any danger from these calls and never went to the police. Julie remembered another person with whom Catherine had been in contact, a certain Angela who was going to take the dog from the Eastburns, Dixie. Due to plans to move, they decided to give it away because there was no one to leave it with. According to the nanny, Catherine had left an ad in the newspaper, and after that, she received a call from Angela. Julie was curious about what happened next and unexpectedly shifted the focus back to the bloody crime of 15 years ago. She was worried that it could have been committed by a copycat of Jeffrey MacDonald and wanted to know what the police thought about it. The detective had no trouble getting the suspicious nanny to talk. She willingly shared her long friendship with Dr. MacDonald, believing that he was innocent. They had known each other for a long time and even exchanged letters for several years while he was in prison. When she was asked about her interest in the case, she was unable to justify his behavior, and the detective did not pay much attention to her words. When she confirmed her alibi, he simply removed her from the list of suspects. The police continued to work in the Eastburn house even after midnight, despite the late hour. A young man named Patrick Cohn approached them and decided to tell them about what he saw on the night of Friday, May 10, 1985, at about 3:30 a.m. He noticed a tall, fair-skinned man in jeans, a knitted hat, and a black jacket leaving Eastburn house. The man was carrying a garbage bag slung over his shoulder, got into his white Chevrolet Chevette, and drove away. Patrick's statement was taken seriously, and he was brought to the police station to help create a composite sketch. When the portrait was finished, there was a striking resemblance to a serviceman named Timothy Hennis. He was a 27-year-old man who, along with his younger brother and sister, had been adopted by the Hennis family, a couple who took all 3 of their children from an orphanage. They grew up in a fairly well-off family in Minnesota, which provided them with a bright future. Shortly before these tragic events, Tim married Angela in secret before Christmas in 1984. That same year, Tim's brother died in a motorcycle accident, so they opted for a modest celebration instead of a lavish ceremony. A couple of years later, they had a daughter, Christina. Tim admitted that he was familiar with the victim, Catherine, but there was a good reason for it. They decided to get dog for company, leading to the contact with the woman from the ad. Tim denied any involvement in the crime but mentioned a curious coincidence. He had arranged to meet Catherine on Tuesday, May 7th, just 3 days before the crime, to look at Dixie. When Tim first met the police, everyone was amazed because he looked exactly like the composite sketch. The police asked him to sign a waiver of Miranda rights, to which he agreed, provided he could be assured that he was not a suspect, which turned out to be a ruse. Timothy provided fingerprints, hair samples, saliva, and blood. He confirmed that he had indeed met Catherine that Tuesday and had taken her dog, after which they had not seen each other again. Timothy denied any involvement in the crime and provided a detailed account. Witness Patrick was called to identify him, and he pointed to Timothy. Despite Timothy's insistence that he had not been in the area early in the morning of May 10th, suspicions against him grew stronger due to his lack of an alibi. The police did not yet have an arrest warrant, so Timothy was released. However, after 7 hours, he was detained, officially charged with triple first-degree murder and abuse. Naturally, Timothy was not the only suspect. As is often the case, the police first considered the widower Gary Eastburn. When Gary was informed of the events, he remained surprisingly calm and simply asked if at least one family member had survived. When he learned that only the youngest daughter had survived, he broke down in tears. Gary had grown up as an ordinary young man. At the age of 12, his parents divorced, and his relationship with his stepfather did not work out. Despite this, he had a relatively calm childhood. He met Catherine in 1972, approximately 13 years before the tragedy. At that time, he was around 25 years old, having been born in 1947. Their daughter Kara was born in 1980. Gary decided to become a military man to support his growing family. When he finally returned to the city after the tragedy, he wanted to reach his surviving child. Instead, he was immediately taken to the police station for questioning, where they held him until about 2 a.m. Gary provided a reliable alibi. His blood and hair samples were taken before he was released. He was able to see his daughter late at night. She was in serious condition and did not even recognize him. Afterward, he went into their home to see what was missing. Gary had no idea who could have attacked his wife and children. They had no obvious enemies, but he remembered several prank calls that had started a few months before he left for training at officer school. The caller addressed Catherine by her first and last name, but no one paid attention to it at the time. Everyone thought it was just teenagers playing around, so no one raised the alarm. Now, in light of the tragic events, the calls seemed more suspicious. However, they could not be tracked due to a lack of technology at that time. After inspecting the house, the police reported that a metal safe containing important family documents was missing, along with $300 in cash that had been set aside for Christmas and Catherine's wallet with bank cards. This provided valuable clues. The ATM was identified, and it turned out that a transaction was made using Catherine's card. It was used shortly after the murders, including a transaction on May 11th. Detectives found a witness who provided a description of the man who came at night to withdraw cash, and this description exactly matched Timothy Hennis. In addition, she saw a white car belonging to Timothy. At this stage, the whole city already knew about the crime and the main suspect. Other witnesses also came forward. Timothy's neighbor saw him burning something in his backyard the day after the murder, likely getting rid of evidence. A local dry cleaner reported that Timothy had brought them a black jacket right after the crime. According to the description, it resembled the clothing that the witness Patrick had described. Timothy was questioned when his ex-wife said he had come to visit her that fateful night. His landlord mentioned that Timothy had not paid the rent for the house, which had accumulated over $300 in debt, but as soon as the eviction notice was served on May 10th, Timothy paid it off almost immediately. But where did he get the money so quickly? It seemed strange that the same amount disappeared from the home of the murdered family. Indirect evidence against Timothy was accumulating, but there was no irrefutable proof. By Christmas, it was decided to allow the suspect to post bail with the help of his relatives, and he managed to raise the funds. The reason for this leniency was the results of laboratory tests indicating that his biological materials did not match any evidence. Specifically, his blood type did not match. However, this could be attributed to the low accuracy of the testing methods used at that time. The prosecutor's office decided to turn to the only survivor of that bloody night, 2-year-old Jana. After the tragedy, the girl had not been able to come to her senses for a long time, but by February of the following year, she finally spoke. Gary was categorically against involving his daughter in the investigation, fearing that she would suffer further psychological trauma, but under pressure from the police, he ultimately agreed in order to seek justice for the victims. A special psychologist from North Carolina held 5 recorded conversations with Jana. During this time, she experienced several panic attacks and was still unable to recognize Timothy's photo. Based on the results of these sessions, it remained unclear whether there was one perpetrator or multiple criminals. Thus, the prosecutor's office decided to refuse to use Jana's testimony in the case. The trial was set for April 27, 1986. Timothy rejected the plea bargain offered by the prosecution. His lawyer wanted to change the location of the hearing but ultimately decided it would not make much difference. Instead, the defense focused on refuting the numerous circumstantial evidence on which the prosecution's case was based. The lawyer argued that the witness Patrick was lying when he claimed to have seen Timothy, described his appearance and car in such detail, especially since it had happened at night. He questioned how Patrick could have seen all of this in the dark. The lawyer discovered that the witness was going through a difficult time and had been pressured by the police. During numerous meetings with Timothy's lawyer, Patrick admitted that he might have made a mistake during the identification. The more he talked with the defense, the less certain he became about having seen Timothy on the street that night. On the day of the trial, the lawyer tried to get Patrick to admit that he had participated in the identification under pressure from detectives, but he did not. The defense discovered something even more significant. During the investigation, the police had gained access to the Fort Bragg duty log, which showed that Tim was on duty at the time of the crime, but this page mysteriously disappeared during the investigation. The lawyer believed that the detectives had intentionally torn out this page. Now, the defense attorney pressed this fact, interpreting the police's behavior as an attempt to convict an innocent person by destroying evidence of his innocence. Timothy's family was away at the time of the crime. The prosecution proposed a theory that Timothy had taken advantage of his wife's absence to start a romantic relationship with Catherine and visited her home on that fateful evening. However, Catherine rejected his advances, which angered him, leading him to kill her and her 2 children. The discussion then turned to the bank card. It was determined that the payment method had been used at 2:52 a.m. on May 11th when the defendant was on duty. Although this could not be confirmed, there was reasonable doubt that Timothy could have used it. Even though there was still no confirmed alibi for the night of the crime, the lawyers systematically managed to destroy the majority of the prosecution's arguments and raised doubts among the jury in order to convince them of Timothy's innocence. The prosecution presented frightening photographs from the crime scene and autopsies of the victims, about 100 photographs, which were included in a slideshow that lasted more than an hour. The tension in the courtroom was palpable. Despite the defense attorney's desperate attempts to convince the jury of the defendant's innocence, on July 4, 1986, Timothy Hennis was found guilty on all counts. The defense attorney believed that the main reason for this verdict was their failure to insist on a change of venue. He felt that his job was not finished since Timothy was sentenced to death, so he focused on saving his client's life. Interestingly, just a few days after starting his sentence, Timothy received a postcard in prison signed by Mr. X. In it, a mysterious stranger claimed responsibility for killing Timothy's family and apologized for Timothy serving time for his crimes. Mr. X admitted that he had left North Carolina and had no intention of returning. Timothy informed his lawyer about the postcard. Later, it was used at the retrial, but at the time of its receipt, the prosecutor dismissed it as a forgery. During this period, Timothy's parents rallied around him. Despite their divorce, they made every effort to save enough money to pay for his defense. The Supreme Court of North Carolina was approached, and the lawyers cited bias, arguing that the jury had been provoked by the photographs. The defense insisted that nearly 100 gruesome images from the massacre were guaranteed to elicit a negative reaction from the jury. Despite the lack of irrefutable evidence against Timothy, it came to light that several detectives who led the case were nearing retirement. The lawyers believed they simply did not want to leave behind an unsolved crime of such magnitude and were seeking a scapegoat, which they considered Timothy Hennis to be. The defense successfully secured a change of venue to Wilmington, a coastal town located 100 kilometers from Fayetteville. The new prosecutor agreed to this change without hesitation, confident in the prosecution's tactics, but the defense was well prepared and closed all loopholes except for one. There was still no reliable confirmation of the defendant's whereabouts on the night of the murder. The defense aimed to discredit the prosecution's main witness, Patrick, in court. During the interval between the first and second trials, Patrick had committed several minor offenses, including driving without a license. When stopped by the authorities, he advised them to contact the district attorney since he was a witness in the Timothy case. The lawyers believed this statement practically indicated that he had received a bribe from the very beginning. More thorough examinations of the collected evidence refuted the case against Timothy. The shoe prints found inside the house were 3 sizes smaller than his. There was blood on a towel in the bathroom, as well as other traces that did not match his profile. The defense presented a black jacket to the judge that was tested for bloodstains. Even the hair found on Catherine's body did not belong to Timothy. In this context, the numerous circumstantial pieces of evidence that the prosecutor's office had used in the first trial appeared less convincing during the retrial. The prosecution attempted to challenge all the defense's arguments with their own versions, but none of this was compelling in light of the thorough preparation from the defense. 2 days later, the jury found Timothy not guilty on all counts. It is noteworthy that during this hearing, only a few photographs from the crime scene were shown, as opposed to the 100 images in a lengthy slideshow during the first trial. 3 years later, Timothy was released from death row. He re-enlisted in military service, served in Saudi Arabia and Somalia, and then returned to the United States. In 1998, Timothy and his family settled in Fort Lewis, Washington. In 2004, he retired from the Army and took a job at a waste processing plant. He also became a Boy Scout leader. Meanwhile, widower Gary followed his plan and moved with his surviving daughter to the UK. In 2009, he served in the Royal Air Force, after which he married a nurse. In 2009, after leaving the Air Force, Gary returned to the U.S. and settled in Washington. Subsequently, legislation was amended to prohibit retrials for individuals already convicted twice of the same crime. Disagreements arose on the basis that during the first trial, Timothy was in military service, thereby placing him under a different jurisdiction. This left the state in limbo, although it did not exclude the possibility that he could be brought to retrial. Despite such situations being rare in the state's judicial practice, they did not return to the case for almost 20 years. It seemed that life was improving, but the case of the triple murder remained unsolved. Finally, in 2006, a detective investigating particularly brutal murders decided to test the DNA materials collected from the body of Catherine. However, the only information the laboratory could provide at that time was that the collected samples belonged to a light-skinned individual. By 2010, the laboratory in North Carolina became embroiled in a significant scandal. It turned out that over the past decade and a half, the state crime lab systematically concealed or manipulated evidence to ensure convictions. This was revealed in at least 230 cases, 10 of which resulted in the wrongful conviction of innocent people sentenced to death. 3 of them even received lethal injections and were deprived of life. The DNA in the Eastburn case was retested, and the examination showed that the materials from the crime scene in the archive matched those of Timothy Hennis. In light of such convincing evidence, his trial was reopened for the 3rd time. Timothy hired the best military lawyer named Frank Spinner to lead his defense team. The lawyer attempted to tarnish the reputation of the victim, Catherine, by alleging that she was promiscuous with Timothy, hinting that that was why his DNA might have turned up in her home. Timothy argued that she was unfaithful to him and that the real killer was an individual named Mr. X, who had written a postcard to him while he was in prison. This attempt had the opposite effect, The prosecutor's office pointed out the obvious lie, as Timothy had previously denied any intimate contact with Catherine. He later claimed that he initially did not disclose the affair due to fear of exposure. Despite a fierce struggle for Timothy's freedom, the chosen tactics now appeared unconvincing. On April 15, 2010, a jury recommended that Hennis be sentenced to death. In addition, he was demoted to Private E1, stripped of all pay and allowances, dishonorably discharged from the United States Army. Hennis was incarcerated at the United States Disciplinary Barracks at Fort Leavenworth in Kansas, where he remains to this day. All his subsequent appeals were rejected. Under U.S. legislation, without the president's approval, they cannot execute him. Therefore, the likelihood that he will be deprived of life is low. The U.S. military has not executed anyone from its ranks since 1961. Interestingly, in 1985, when the murders of the Eastburn family occurred, a 20-year-old woman from Rochester, Minnesota, where Tim had lived for a long time, contacted the police to share her story. Upon hearing about the triple murder in North Carolina, she revealed that at the age of 11, she had been abused by Timothy Hennis. Unfortunately, due to a data error, she was not permitted to testify. Had she been allowed to do so, the outcome of the second trial, when he was acquitted, could have been entirely different, and he would most likely have been found guilty again. Even now, this trial raises more questions than answers. The story of the nanny, who cared for the Eastburn children, also raises many questions. Julie was addicted, and there were witnesses who heard her confess to the crime. Additionally, her unhealthy obsession with Jeffrey MacDonald, with whom she even corresponded, raises further doubts. Some supporters of Timothy believe that it was Julie who could have imitated her idol and killed the family with whom she worked. Chris Benoit, born May 21, 1967, in Montreal, Canada, is a devoted family man. However, to the wrestling world, he was a formidable competitor and one of the sport's biggest stars. At 40 years old, he was actively involved in numerous matches. Known as the Rabid Wolverine, he particularly enjoyed a strong following in Canada, where he seemed to balance his intense wrestling persona with that of an ideal father. Wrestling legend Chris Jericho remarked, "Chris was always a great father and very focused on his family." Chris's life was demanding. Wrestling careers tend to be shorter than in many other professions, largely due to the dangers associated with the sport. Although the matches are scripted, the physical impact is huge. However, Chris and others try to fit in as many matches as possible during their short careers. He was constantly on the move, going from one wrestling event to another, and no matter the distance, he was always there to perform. This backdrop made the events of June 23, 2007, even more shocking. In the days leading up to the tragedy, Chris's behavior raised concern among his friends and family. Although he was accustomed to a demanding schedule with World Wrestling Entertainment, something seemed to have changed during those days. On June 22, 2007, he was scheduled to fly to a event in Houston, Texas, but he missed his flight, which was highly unusual for him. Chavo Guerrero, a close friend and fellow wrestler, was the first to sense that something was wrong. When Chavo finally contacted Chris, his voice sounded strange and disconnected. During their conversation, Chris expressed his affection for Chavo in an unusual way, raising concerns. He explained that his wife, Nancy, had been vomiting blood and their son, Daniel, was also seriously ill. This situation was worrying and seemed like a plausible reason for his absence. Chavo believed it was likely a temporary issue and hoped to reconnect with Chris when they met in Houston. However, the next day, Chris's behavior became even more alarming. He left a series of strange voicemails for Chavo, apologizing for missing the show and promising to catch the next flight to Houston. But the voicemails didn't sound like Chris, his tone was off, and he spoke in a somewhat erratic manner. He claimed he would arrive in Houston by 8 a.m., which didn't align with the timing needed for his flight. What had begun as a simple family emergency was quickly escalating into something concerning, prompting worries among others in the community that something terrible might happen. Chris also mentioned missing his flight and being late to the event in Beaumont, Texas, which was out of character for him, as he was known for always being punctual. He sounded tired and groggy and ended his message with an "I love you," which was not something Chris typically said to a colleague. This raised alarm bells. Initially, Chavo tried to dismiss it, thinking Chris was just overwhelmed with his family's health issues and the care they required, but he still felt that something was off. Just 12 minutes after receiving a voicemail, Chavo called Chris back but received no answer. He left a message asking Chris to return his call as soon as possible. At 3:44 p.m., Chris called back and explained that he missed Chavo's initial call because he was rescheduling his flight. Chavo felt uneasy and asked if something else was wrong. Chris dismissed his concerns, stating that he had a very stressful day and was worn out from his family's sudden illness. Chavo, however, doesn't believe Chris because he knows Chris enough to suspect that there's more to the story than meets the eye. He chose not to press further and suggested that they talk later after the fight, ending the call. At 3:51 a.m. on Sunday, June 24th, Chavo and their mutual friend, Scott Armstrong, received strange texts from Chris. One message included the address of Chris's family home, while another mentioned that his dogs were safely secured near the pool and that the garage door was still open. Although the text seemed odd, it was early in the morning, so they overlooked them, assuming Chris had made a mistake. A few hours later, Chavo was at Houston Airport waiting for Chris to arrive. On Monday, June 25, 2007, as WWE prepared for Raw in Corpus Christi, WWE Vice President of Talent Relations John Laurinaitis, aka Johnny Ace, reviewed the messages Scott and Chavo received from Chris early Sunday morning. The messages suggested that something was seriously wrong. After several hours without Chris showing up, WWE officials decided to call Fayetteville police for a welfare check on Chris and his family. By 4:15 p.m., they received alarming news. 3 bodies had been discovered in Chris's home, leading authorities to declare the scene a major crime scene. The bodies of Chris, his wife Nancy, and their son Daniel were discovered in various areas of the house, marking a tragic and horrific incident. On Friday, June 22, 2007, Chris killed his wife, Nancy, in the bonus room of their home in Fayetteville. Police later revealed that before her death, Nancy's arms had been tied with coaxial cables, and her feet were secured with duct tape. In the kitchen, they discovered a balled-up tube sock and tape that had dried blood on it, which authorities believed was used as a makeshift gag before her murder. Her body was found wrapped in a blanket next to a Bible. Evidence indicated that Chris had pressed his knee into her back while strangling her with a cord around her neck. There were no signs of a struggle prior to Nancy's death. Toxicology reports showed alcohol in her system, but it was unclear if she had consumed it before her death or if it was a result of decomposition. The condition of her body also complicated the determination of hydrocodone and alprazolam levels, raising the question of whether she had been sedated, similar to their son, Daniel, who was killed the next day, June 23, 2007. Daniel was Chris's 3rd child and only son with Nancy. He was found suffocated, with another Bible next to him. Although there were no visible bruises, internal injuries to his throat confirmed the cause of death. Reports indicated that Daniel had been sedated with Xanax and was unconscious when he died. His body was decomposing, but not as severely as his mother's. Just hours before Chris ended his life on June 24, 2007, his internet searches raised serious concerns about his intentions. These searches indicate that he was not in a state of confusion but was preparing for something sinister. The last known photograph of Chris, taken on June 22, 2007, shows him at Dr. Phil Aston's office, just before the tragedy that would follow. Investigations later uncovered that Chris had searched for methods to break a neck, a troubling detail revealed by his former fiancée in a podcast in 2016. However, the Fayetteville County Sheriff's Office did not verify these specific searches, and Chris's autopsy showed no neck injuries. Additionally, there was a note, a final message found in a Bible next to the bodies of his wife and son, which simply stated that he was preparing to leave this earth. No one knew exactly what this meant, but it seemed like a final farewell, perhaps even a confession, as if Chris was trying to understand the actions he had just taken. The note was later sent to his first wife, Martina, and their 2 children in Canada. Chris's father, Michael, verified its existence, indicating that the tragedy might have been premeditated rather than a spontaneous act. The Bibles beside Nancy and Daniel added to the ominous atmosphere of the scene. Some interpreted the note as a sign of guilt, while others viewed it as Chris finally facing the reality of his actions. In his last days, Chris's life was plagued by darkness. Years of head injuries from wrestling had severely affected his brain, and the emotional burden of losing his close friend Eddie Guerrero plunged him deeper into despair. His mental health deteriorated, and the combination of physical and emotional challenges ultimately led to one of the most tragic events in wrestling history. He was found in his home gym, hanging from a pulley system with a towel around his neck. No one could have anticipated this outcome, especially following the horrific acts committed against his family. Toxicology reports on Chris revealed unusually high testosterone levels, suggesting steroid use. Additionally, traces of Xanax and hydrocodone were found, raising further questions about his state of mind. Was he under the influence when he killed Nancy and Daniel? While it's uncertain, it's clear that his mental health was unstable in his final days. Analyzing the crime scene, autopsies, and toxicology results indicates that this was a calculated crime. Chris spent days methodically killing his wife, his son, and ultimately himself. Steroids were discovered in Chris's home, hinting that roid rage may have influenced his actions. Some medical professionals link steroid use to significant anger issues and psychological problems like paranoia. Investigators noted a substantial time gap between Nancy's death and that of their son Daniel, suggesting that the murders were premeditated rather than impulsive. Prosecutors in New York began investigating Chris's orders from Signature Pharmacy and MedXLife.com, both of which sold steroids and HGH online. Terrence Kindlon, the lawyer for MedXLife co-owner Gary Brandwine, denied the claims that his client provided steroids to Chris. According to Sports Illustrated, Chris received 3 shipments from Signature Pharmacy, the first in December 2005 at a Texas address, the second in February 2006 in Peachtree City, Georgia, and the third in July 2006 in Fort Walton Beach, Florida. This investigation was part of a larger probe into steroid use among wrestlers, which implicated several individuals, including Kurt Angle, Eddie Guerrero, Rey Mysterio, Edge, and Gregory Helms. Following the tragic deaths of the Chris family, there was a demand for answers, but each inquiry uncovered more questions. By the time authorities found the bodies of Nancy, Daniel, and Chris on June 25, 2007, some aspects of the case began to connect, but the overall picture remained unclear. The investigation was relatively simple. Chris killed his wife and son before ending his own life. However, something felt wrong about the scene. There were no signs of forced entry or struggle, making it disturbingly calm. Nancy's hands and feet were tied, and a Bible was found next to both her and Daniel. Was this indicative of Chris's mental breakdown, or was he trying to justify his actions in some twisted way? The toxicology report indicated high testosterone levels, confirming long-term steroid use, but it wasn't just the drugs at play. Chris's autopsy showed early signs of dementia and chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE, indicating brain damage from years of head injuries. CTE affects behavior, causes mood swings, and can lead to aggression. Could this have been the crucial factor? Eddie, Chris's best friend, passed away 2 years prior, and many believe this loss significantly affected Chris. Eddie's death deeply impacted Chris, leading those close to him to report that he began to spiral downward. He became increasingly withdrawn and distant, showing signs of mental struggle. The combined emotional toll of losing a close friend and the physical repercussions of years in wrestling created immense pressure on him. This burden, along with other personal issues, likely contributed to his mental and emotional decline. Neuroscientist and former wrestler Christopher Nowinski suggests that Chris suffered from too many untreated concussions, which could have gradually harmed his mental well-being. Christopher noted that Chris was one of the few wrestlers who intentionally took chair shots to the back of his head, a reckless decision. After examining Chris's brain, Dr. Julian Bales, a neurosurgery expert at West Virginia University, found that Chris's brain showed such significant damage that it resembled that of an 85-year-old Alzheimer's patient. Additional tests confirmed that Chris had severe chronic traumatic encephalopathy, a condition that can lead to serious behavioral problems. Chris's father later suggested that brain damage could be the main reason behind the tragic murder, but WWE dismissed this idea as mere speculation. In May 2003, Nancy filed for divorce, citing abuse from Chris, but she withdrew the filing 3 months later. In 2008, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution reported that Nancy might have suspected Chris of having an affair with a female WWE wrestler. There were also reports that they fought over a life insurance policy, based on information from the Fayette County Sheriff's Office. The reasons behind the Chris family tragedy are complex, and multiple theories have emerged to explain how things went so wrong. WWE Chairman Vince McMahon commented on the incident, suggesting that it stemmed from mental health issues combined with the physical toll of Chris's wrestling career. Vince believes that Chris's actions were not solely due to steroids, rather, they were influenced by the physical damage to his body and the emotional stress he was experiencing. While Vince's comments spark debate, they highlight the significant effects wrestling can have on an individual's mental and physical well-being. It was evident that Chris was in distress, and this tragedy likely resulted from years of accumulated physical and emotional stress. An unusual detail emerged when a statement about Nancy's death was added to Chris Benoit's Wikipedia page just 14 hours before police found the bodies of Chris and his family. The update mentioned that Chris was replaced by Johnny Nitro for the ECW World Championship match at Vengeance because he was not there due to personal issues stemming from the death of his wife, Nancy. Wikinews noticed this update, which was later reported by Fox News. The edit took place at 4 a.m. on June 25th, nearly 10.5 hours before the bodies were discovered at 2:30 p.m. that same day. Compounding the mystery, the IP address of the editor was traced back to Stamford, Connecticut, which was then the headquarters of WWE. When this early report reached the media, the anonymous editor claimed it was merely a coincidence. But was it really? Ryan Smith was born in 1975 in San Diego, California, USA. From a young age, he harbored a strong desire to travel and learn about different cultures around the world. This passion ultimately led him to emigrate from his home country. At 27, Ryan was eager to explore Eurasia, particularly the former Soviet Union. In 2002, he embarked on a journey to Azerbaijan, a nation located at the crossroads of Eastern Europe and Western Asia, bordered by the Caspian Sea and the Caucasus Mountains. For Ryan, it was the ideal starting point for his adventures. In Baku, the capital of Azerbaijan, Ryan immersed himself in the local language and culture. He worked in a carpet market within the walled city, learning about one of the region's oldest and most valued crafts. The tradition of carpet making is passed down through generations, and Ryan was captivated by the beauty of the carpets. This experience inspired him to consider starting a business focused on handmade carpets. In December 2005, Ryan returned to the United States to launch his project. While there, he met and married a young teacher named Laura. She encouraged Ryan to restrict his travels and concentrate on their life together. In 2011, they traveled to Georgia, a former Soviet republic bordering Azerbaijan, where they got married in the city of Marnoli and planned to produce traditional carpets. In 2014, their son Caleb was born. Meanwhile, Ryan and Laura worked on their long-awaited project of weaving handmade carpets using traditional Azerbaijani techniques that Ryan had developed. Each carpet had the potential to sell for over $1,000 in international markets. While Laura taught English at a local government school, Ryan traveled to nearby villages to find weavers to collaborate with. However, Ryan was surprised to find few artisans still practicing traditional methods. Some artisans who had initially expressed interest in the project later withdrew for various reasons, including disagreements over pricing and uncertainty about the designs. Ryan shared on his blog that during a 4-day visit to Kalari, a place he had not been to before, he found artisans who were willing to join his project. Ryan aimed to do more than just make a profit or preserve an ancient culture. He wanted to become a community benefactor by inviting women from the countryside, who possessed traditional weaving skills, to join his project. This opportunity would allow them to revive their craft and support their families. As a result, Ryan and Laura became one of the most respected couples in their town. Ryan considered this place to be incredibly special. His wife, Laura, connected deeply with the city and its people, engaging in teaching and forging numerous friendships. Meanwhile, Ryan promoted the art of carpet weaving from the ancient culture and earned admiration from the locals. Most residents regarded them as kind and trustworthy individuals they could turn to for help. They quickly assimilated into the local society, traditions, and culture, which led to them applying for citizenship in 2012, becoming citizens of both the United States and the state of Georgia. Laura and Ryan planned to build a kindergarten with a playground using their own funds. Just when they felt they had found a true home and a promising future for their family, tragedy struck unexpectedly, shattering all their dreams. In July 2018, Ryan, aged 43, and Laura, aged 42, decided to take a short vacation with their son Caleb to escape their daily routine. Laura's friend, Sabina Taliboba, recounted that Laura called her on July 4th to share their plans to go to the mountains, notifying her that they would be away for 2 days. They selected a small and picturesque spot near the Godori Mountains, known for its beautiful trails, waterfalls, and gorges, perfect for quiet walks and picnics in nature. However, instead of finding peace, they encountered a nightmare. Concerned about getting lost and wanting a safe experience for their son Caleb, they sought a local guide. They met Mokaz Kabori, a 19-year-old shepherd who, while not a resident of the area, was familiar with it as he often grazed livestock there. Mokaz had a calm demeanor and was well regarded by the locals, leading them to hire him as their guide. Shortly after their journey into the mountains began, Ryan and Laura discovered Mokaz's disturbing intentions. They hiked up to a clearing where they set up camp for dinner, near one of the local springs for fresh water. At some point, Ryan became concerned about how Mokaz was handling his weapon, which he always carried. This led to a heated argument between them. In an unexpected turn of events, Mokaz turned the weapon on Ryan and attacked him in the head, followed by an attack to his back. The echoes of the gunfire were drowned out by Laura's terrified screams and Caleb's cries, but the worst was yet to unfold. Despite Laura's desperate pleas, Mokaz pressed the weapon against Caleb's head and attacked the boy at point-blank range. Laura, terrified and unable to fully comprehend the horror unfolding before her, was left in shock. She froze in place, but as she met Mokaz's cold stare, she realized his intentions. Driven by instinct to survive, Laura ran as fast as she could to escape the fate that had befallen her husband and son. However, when she reached the edge of the cliff by the waterfall, she found herself with nowhere to go. Mokaz used his weapon to assault her, then pushed her off the cliff, causing her to land on the riverbank below. Afterward, investigators uncovered that Mokaz had buried Caleb's body in a concealed location, along with the weapon he used. He then returned to the village as if nothing had happened. After several days without word from Laura, her friend Sabina grew concerned. She tried to contact both Laura and Ryan but received no response. Ryan's friends were also puzzled, as it was very unusual for him to go silent for such an extended period. On Friday, July 6, 2018, the Emergency Response and Emergency Situation Center received a report about a Georgian-American family that might be missing in the mountains. The caller, Sabina, informed them that the Smith family, including their 4-year-old son, had not been reachable for over 2 days. In response, a team of 15 rescuers was dispatched to the area where the family was last seen. When the rescuers arrived, they discovered Laura's belongings and vehicle. As they continued along the trail, they made a shocking discovery. They found a lifeless body at the bottom of a waterfall. This prompted the rescuers to intensify their search and widen the area they were covering. Later, they located another human body about 800 meters from the waterfall. Due to the heat and humidity typical of the season, the decomposition of the bodies was rapid. Initially, authorities reported that the victims showed no signs of violence. In accordance with Georgia's criminal code, an investigation was initiated, but details about Laura and Ryan's child, Caleb, remained unclear for several days. Investigators discovered that Maucaz Kabori was the last person in contact with the family. As a result, he was arrested, and during questioning, he claimed to know the whereabouts of Caleb. For days after the Smith family went hiking in the mountains, he led investigators to where he had buried Caleb and the murder weapon. The following day, the Georgian Ministry of Internal Affairs announced that Maucaz had been taken into custody and charged with the murders of the Smith family. This tragic incident shocked the nation, particularly in the Marnolly area and the local weaving community. The American consulate also expressed concern over the crime, and an FBI team joined Georgian authorities in the investigation, assisting with evidence collection and analysis. On July 11th, the Tbilisi Municipal Court ordered that Maucaz, who pleaded not guilty, be held in custody. He alleged that 2 foreigners in a black car were the actual killers. According to Maucaz, these individuals murdered the Smith family, threatened him and his family to ensure he wouldn't report them to the police, and left him alive to divert suspicion onto him. Maucaz's lawyer dismissed claims of violence against Laura, arguing that Maucaz was incapable of such acts because he was a virgin. On July 12th, friends, media activists, and members of public organizations gathered outside Ryan's house in Marnolly with toys, flowers, and candles to pay their respects and remember his family. The following day, Maucaz's lawyer affirmed his client's innocence, stating that the crime was committed by 2 foreigners and that Maucaz had initially pleaded guilty due to psychological pressure. However, evidence against Maucaz began to surface. The most significant evidence came from the autopsy report of the victims. Ryan had 2 weapon wounds, one to the head and one to the back. Caleb was attacked in the head at close range. In Laura's case, the abuse and assault were confirmed, and DNA tests showed that the biological material found on her and her underwear matched Maucaz's DNA. Additionally, DNA from both Ryan and Maucaz was discovered on the murder weapon. An FBI technical examination of the Smith family and Maucaz's phones revealed that Maucaz's phone contained photos of Laura's lifeless body at the falls. He had shown these photos to several locals, claiming he had stumbled upon the body while walking in the area. Investigators also discovered that Maucaz had visited several adult websites in the days leading up to the incident. These findings led investigators to believe that Maucaz had a personal interest in Laura and that his actions were premeditated from the moment the Smith family contacted him for a trip to the falls. Following the investigation's results, Maucaz's lawyer, David, resigned, citing principled reasons for not being able to continue defending him. Another lawyer took over the case, maintaining Maucaz's innocence and filing a motion to retract his earlier confession. Maucaz's mother supported her son and agreed with the position of the new lawyer. The defense argued that police may have coerced Maucaz into confessing under threats of imprisonment. His family claimed that the high-profile nature of the case led the authorities to charge him quickly in order to close it. Nevertheless, on November 9, 2018, Maucaz Kabori was formally charged with murdering 3 members of the Smith family. He also faced additional abuse charges against Laura. A psychological evaluation indicated that Maucaz was mentally fit for trial. His pre-trial detention was scheduled to end on April 9, 2019, but the prosecutor asserted that they had strong evidence of his guilt and that he would receive appropriate punishment for his crimes. On March 25, 2019, the court unanimously found Maucaz guilty of premeditated murder with particular cruelty toward 3 members of the Smith family. He committed these murders to cover up another crime, namely, the abuse. On March 27, 2019, Judge Gogat Kopriashvili of the Gori District Court sentenced Maucaz Kabori to life in prison. While his family protested the sentence, claiming it was unjust, the friends and family of Smith felt relieved by the verdict. The defense attorneys announced plans to appeal, arguing that there were procedural errors in the trial. The U.S. consul in Georgia stated that the verdict brought justice to the Smith family, noting that the evidence clearly proved Maucaz's guilt. From the moment Ryan and Laura Smith arrived in Georgia, they earned the love and respect of the Marnolly community. Their brutal murder deeply affected the community they had chosen to make their home. Laura and Ryan Smith's community project not only revived an ancient tradition but also provided income and stability to many local women. After their tragic deaths, many women who were striving to build successful businesses experienced sadness and uncertainty. However, the project was later revitalized by investors who supported Ryan's vision and created opportunities for local artisans. Ryan and Laura left their familiar life in the West to explore a new culture. They received a warm welcome from the community, but their lives were filled with sadness because there was a mysterious person hiding their true nature behind the guise of a kind shepherd.